We're live?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Polity's podcast, Good Money. And we are here to answer your questions.
All right, let's go.
Happy Feast of St. Nicholas.
Happy Feast of St. Nicholas. You know what? This is a good day to have money because we're all supposed to get gold coins today.
That's right. So hopefully,
So that we're not sold into a prostitution ring.
that's right.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's the story.
St. Nicholas is the giver of gifts. So under his patronage, we answer your questions. So if we get any of them wrong, take it up with him. All right. You want to just start? Are we reading them or are they-
Josiah, are you reading them?
I can read questions.
do
out
the
of
people on the live
chat.
stream hear you? Just say.
Yeah, they can.
Oh wow! This is a nifty setup. You're not in the room, but you're in the internet.
I can read questions out of the our Discord and off the live stream.
Okay.
But those pre-printed questions, you guys take any or those whenever you want. Or
Sure.
if you want a different question not on there, you want me to find something interesting, let me know.
Okay.
Cool.
You start. Just say.
All right. Here's an interesting question. Given the practical goods that you can achieve by having a credit card, are credit cards immoral?
Are credit cards immoral? The practical goods that you can achieve, like
Fraud protection,
5%
cashback.
cash back,
Yeah.
or win a free trip to,
Well,
or not win a free trip, but get a free trip to Venezuela.
I'll take a stab. Here's the deal.
Alright.
Credit cards, they're profitable because of charging interest on loans, right? But typically speaking, most of them don't charge you interest on loans if you pay it back in time.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's right.
So you've got two options here. Your furnace breaks. You have no money. Say, get a credit card and a friend. Well, ask your friend first, because if he gives you the money, then you're good. But if you really need the money, I don't see a problem with getting the credit card, so long as your intention is to pay it back really quick, not participate in usury. But if you're just talking about like accruing debts through credit cards, then of course I don't think that's moral.
Yeah, I think I'd have to assume my inner Andrew Jones
Mm-hmm.
and say, first of all, I don't care. But
Yeah.
if I was to assume my inner Mike Sullivan, I would say, screw the usurious bank. Take
Yeah.
everything they got.
Right.
And if I was to assume myself, I'd say, I just don't have time for it.
Well, and if I
How's
was
that?
going to assume myself, I would just say that I think we know our own habitual, like I think we kind of know how holy we are. It's rarely very impressive when we do this sort of analysis. And one of the things that not quite holy people do is when they're given a sort of infinite spending possibility, or at least a spending possibility that is beyond what their labor actually achieves in this world, they tend to buy stupid stuff. They tend to anticipate being able to pay things back when they probably can't. And so it represents a temptation, a near occasion of sin. And I think that as such, it's usually prudent to have nothing to do with them. But because there is a way of essentially using a loan without accruing any interest through a credit card, I think if you do that self-examination and you're like, no, I'm actually very, very capable of resisting the implicit temptation to luxury in the credit card, then yeah, I mean, you
Yeah,
can do that.
I'd toss one other thing is that we are a people trying to repent and recover from our technocratic manipulations. So trying to scheme and through our scheming feel like Pharaoh, feel like we've conquered something. And if that is a temptation for you, and credit cards are an avenue by which to exercise that pharaohic, is that the right word?
Sure.
Pharaonic
actually it is
quality, then I would say hold off. Don't do it for a little while. See if you can come back to it with a purer heart.
Yeah, but in an emergency, all bets are off.
That's absolutely right. Cool.
All right, I'll take one from the emails that we got. What is New Polity's take on the new Vatican investing guidelines? Mensuram bonum. Good measure.
Good measure, baby.
And to be clear, this is the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences that put out a
Yeah, so it's
document?
not like exactly the magisterium or anything like that.
I have not read it.
Yep. All right.
I read the forward.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at too. So I'm sorry. I did like this part. Freedom is a fundamental expression of this dignity. He's talking about a dignity that's given by God. It's God-given dignity, including those free rights to worship, exercise conscience, and form associations or communities for common purpose. Pope Francis points to the holy core of human dignity, writing that humanity is the sacred temple in which merchants are prevented from speculating and may not be reduced to serving money.
Yeah, it's there was some control effing going on before this.
We have a thing in the office about control effing that there is a real sign, like the name of doing it reveals how gross it is, and you should actually just read.
It's a violence.
But we stoop into control effing every once in a while, especially when we see that there's a question that about a document that
nobody told me. Investing guidelines. Okay, we're gonna be all over that soon. Don't worry. But what I'm noticing from the Vatican and Associates is that they're obviously listening to New Polity. I don't know who's. I'm serious. I don't know who's doing the Italian translation for them, but I love them for it.
Say it's Andrew
Grazie.
Bernetsky. Yeah,
I had to think about that. And they are down on speculation, and so I think this is the kind of examination of conscience that's going on in the church right now. You'll recall that New Polity has sort of put its chips in the corner that speculation is a sin, and that's sort of a no ifs, ands, or buts situation, right? That is to say that if you are doing something where you're not sinning, it is not speculation. In fact, it should have some other name.
That's right.
So and this document, from what our control effing revealed, seems to suggest exactly the same. They're not saying, okay, here's speculation, here's the bad form of speculation, here's the good form of speculation. There's condemnations of speculation throughout the document, and then there's calls to ethical investing. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit mired down in a lot of, how Vatican documents always have to quote everyone before they tell you what's up. They're like, as Lumen Gentium says, quote, and Pope Francis agrees, quote. So
you gotta show you're part of the tradition.
Well, I appreciate that.
But I think we should probably stop talking about this document
because
we didn't really know.
All right, but we're going to sum it up. We're going to write a little article on newpolity.com saying, here is why everyone agrees with us. Okay. Another one from Josiah.
Okay, this is from our friend Zach.
Hey, Zach.
He asks, is scale naturally in conflict with the principles of good money? In other words, are larger organizations naturally given to vice in such a way that they ought to be deprioritized for smaller organizations, all else held equal?
It's a great question.
Really good question.
Zach's a smart guy.
He's on it.
Yeah. No, I mean, scale is not in itself. I guess large scale is just not in itself illicit. Like, there's nothing within church teaching, and there's nothing within what we think that somehow gives a condemnation to large scale operation as such. Mm-hmm. Okay, that we have to be upfront with that. So sometimes people hear what we're saying, and then they think something like, well, then you must not like the Holy Roman Empire, because a lot of large scale management of persons and, I guess management
not
is
as
not the right
much.
term.
Yeah, not really then. Yeah.
Actually, there was a lot of putting your hands up and saying,
I don't know, you do your thing.
You do your thing, obey God.
But even the commendation from the popes that we should have a world government.
Yeah.
Suggests that there is something that needs to be universalized and
sometimes
scalable.
And sometimes this is remedial, right? Like, sin always expands itself, and so our response to sin sometimes has to be expansive as a result. So, for instance, all things being equal, I think that having a really big army is bad. But where there is, say, pagans holding the holy places. I understand raising up a really big army to meet that problem.
But in terms
Yeah.
of a kind of like a global tech company or something like that, there's okay, let's take something easier, like a let me back up. So when Hilaire Belloc considered this question, he said, there's nothing within distributism that suggests that it cannot scale. And he pointed towards, like, I think it was a railroad companies. We could maybe point to airlines today, or even Mondragon in Spain. The idea there is not so much that that the scale is too large. The point within the distributist framework is that ownership is widespread.
Yeah.
Now, it can be widespread within a major corporation, and Mondragon has demonstrated that. There is, however, some of the considerations to make as you scale about who actually begins to have creative control over the true operations of the company.
Which is another way of saying ownership. I mean, I think you're right about the principle. It's like no size of an operation considered as a whole justifies a lack of distribution of ownership, whether that's the ownership of skill, of creative control, or of money, profits.
Right, but it primarily, in the case of a Mondragon, for instance, it really does come down to profit sharing, which is great and needs to be done. But there's these other considerations along the way of who are you actually able to exercise your creativity, which begins to make you more like God, which begins to operate within your salvation. So
okay, so having said that, though, generally speaking, in our world today, large-scale institutions are wicked and evil, and it's related to them being large-scale because it's an attempt to amass more ownership than is humanly possible. So they try to move beyond a human scale. What I mean is, the human person has only so much capacity. He can work a lot, and then he's got to sleep, right? He can amass a lot of money for a lot of ends, but then he kind of runs out of ends, all right? And then he starts hiring advisors to tell him what to do, okay? He can build a company that's, very big, and he can manage it because he's an intelligent woman, and and it's very complex. And she is, within all the operations, but there becomes a point where she has to hire a consulting firm. Now, at each point, the trouble is that where you have the doctrine of unrestricted growth being a good, so things getting bigger, meaning they're getting better, which, by the way, is insane. And even if it wasn't insane, it also it has this dreadful problem of ruining the world and making people miserable. But I think there's this point at which...
That's just a secondary evil to it being insane.
Yeah. But there's this point in nature, when something grows to a certain extent, it arrives at this kind of crisis point within nature. It's a beautiful crisis at which the natural course, the God-given course, is for it to give itself away, right? So excess is always the point of gift. A tree, it grows, it's bigger, it's more complex, and then it bears fruit, right? Usually after 2 years. An adult grows and grows until finally there's enough of an intelligent person who can put their pants on in the morning, who can get married and have children. People also bear fruit. Scale tends toward, in nature, large scale tends towards those words of Christ that, unless a grain of wheat dies.
Yeah.
It tends towards a death and a giving away.
Yeah.
What John Milbank calls the gift of ruling. So what do I mean? I mean that what we live in today is the adulation and praise of unrestricted growth, at which those moments in which God himself, through the natural order, calls those people who are growing their various institutions and businesses and families, calls them to gift. In the natural order, like, you can't manage this, give it away. And we say no to that call. We refuse it. We block out that warm, presence of the Holy Spirit in our life, and we say, I am going to figure out a way through human cleverness, usually through machines, and definitely through slaves, to continue in a kind of idiotic ownership of the thing, right? So that I can grow beyond a human scale, right? So that's why I brought up all the other things. A consulting firm was a recent example I had of this, right? Or just simply, you think about things that people say, like they used to say, the U.S. Army never sleeps, right? So you can do this through such a massive organization that you're avoiding all human limitation.
Right.
And in the case we do this, instead of saying like, oh, I have so much land that it's time to break it off and give it away. Oh, I have so much money that it's time to make big gifts, to do magnificent works.
Yeah.
I have, instead we say things like, well, now I've got to make my money work for me. And so then we make of it a sort of slave that continues our will in the world and allows us to aggrandize ourselves. The irony, of course, is that you don't actually own that thing, right? You own it in fiction when you start to hire other people. But if you're run by consulting firms, who's in charge? The consulting firm, right? And if you can only manage your land through the use of drones, who's in charge? Well, it's the companies that are giving you that capacity, right? To some extent, the ownership part becomes a myth. It's like the emperor with his eunuchs, right? Like you can run an administrative court by castrating a bunch of boys and kind of ideologically attaching them to yourself so that your administration becomes, effective. You've got 100 people to go do stuff, right? But as anyone knows who studied the history of eunuchs within imperial courts, the eunuchs are in charge, all right? They are telling the emperor what to do, to the great frustration of the free men.
The castrated deep state.
Totally. Okay, all of that was a rant. So what's the new polity position? Scale per se, not a problem. If you need a big thing to solve the problem, do the big thing, right? But scale as it actually exists in history right now is a sign of our inability to set limits upon our own activities because we have a self-aggrandizing view of human power.
Yep.
And so in any given instance, I think it's usually a lie if someone tells you like the reason this thing is so big is because it's fulfilling sort of human ingenuity at this large scale that it can be fulfilled. I think usually that's a lie. Usually there's someone who's amassing ownership beyond human scale, and so people are suffering because of it, because those people become part of a mechanism. They become instruments to that will, as opposed to people who receive the gift of ruling, the gift of land, the gift of ownership.
Right. I think at best, most of our attempts today at scaling are occasions of the vice of curiosity. Can it be done? I really want to know. Can it be done? And that's the question, not should it be done. So,
well, curiosity subjectively, but objectively, I think it's the stock market system.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because
there's a lot of these.
I used to get mad at rich people. Now I feel bad for rich people because I used to think, well, they're greedy.
Come on, there's some rich people you like.
Well, yeah, the saints. But what I mean is, no, I'm talking about a conversion, and because I think I was ignorant and sort of like had a knee-jerk reaction, like, well, why do they insist on amassing? Why do they insist on building the world in their image when there's obvious common goods they could achieve with their money? So I felt bitter and resentful. I was like, I might have become a Marxist if I had just been like pushed in the wrong way. Started going to the G8 summit and throwing pee on people. Why do they always throw pee at people?
I don't know. Would you want to have it on you?
Anyone in the far left want to clear this one up? I keep on hearing in the news that a politician gets pee thrown on him, and it's very specific. Like it's very specific. Like, and I want to know the process. Like, do you?
It was milkshakes for a while.
Was it milkshakes? See that?
They put cement in McDonald's cups. So you thought it was a milkshake, and then if you didn't wash it off quick enough, it would set on your skin.
Oh,
interesting.
Yeah,
that's clever.
Kind of sinister.
Sometimes I wonder, as we work hard at the gospel here, if anyone's ever going to throw pee on me. Anyways, what I was saying was not that.
It might happen at Sumerville, not because anybody knows what you're saying. But
what I was gonna say was that I had this conversion because I realized actually people with money tend to get it through inheritance, through means that they don't necessarily like. There's a couple of rags to riches stories where people are very intentional, but often it's just being inaugurated into a system as a child and ending up with money, and then within the stock market system, and especially within publicly traded companies, you end up in a situation where it is by law that you have to grow the company. I mean, law in the sense
Yeah.
of like it's coercive to you, like in order to succeed.
But it's also a law, like actually in U.S. code.
Oh, like once it's a publicly traded company,
Yeah,
it has
yeah,
to.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
That has to be the goal. And so, and this just goes to show, like, when you make amassments within a society that values unrestricted growth, it's not clear who the winners and the losers are. And this is something I think Americans know. Like, if you think about any like feel good American movie, like the message tends to be that the rich guy is as much the slave, right, as the poor guy he enslaves. And I've come to realize that this was really touching on something very true, that when unrestricted growth is a sort of doctrine of culture, then the person who is essentially forced to indefinitely grow a company and to watch it slowly leave his hands in terms of something that he is proud of, in terms of something that he is really exercising creative control over,
Yeah.
that's a real tragedy. That's a tragedy for the would-be magnificent,
Yeah,
is to see
right.
themselves dissipate into wealth production as opposed to in terms of doing good works and doing magnificent works. And so now I don't say, woe to you, rich, like Jesus. I say, aw shucks to you, rich.
All right, next question.
All right, sorry. I'm sorry. St. Nicholas's feast day. I mean, I'm just feeling happy, jolly.
I haven't eaten my orange yet today. I'm really
that's why you're
excited
so
about it.
sleepy. You got it.
Yeah.
An orange a day.
Actually, is it possible if somebody gets coffee? Is that you got one? You were smart.
Do you want some?
Alex is listening.
You could drink.
Oh, thanks.
If you're,
No,
my
it's
family's
okay.
a little sick.
That's okay. We're
Sure.
sick too.
Okay.
That's all right.
All right.
Oh wait,
All
we'll
right.
see if anybody actually brings
See
me
if
coffee.
anyone-
That'd be so
Does
cool.
anybody care? How is land rent not usurious like trading on the stock market? Now,
Land
there
rent.
are 3 sections to
Okay.
this question. I'm going to sum
Wait,
them up
I'm
a little
confused about land rent. Why?
bit. Like renting a house, I presume.
Okay.
Or land. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not complicating that question.
Okay.
How is land rent not usurious like trading on the stock market? And then he gives 3, or she gives 3 reasons.
Okay.
I say she because I tell you this, we found out that it's like 99% guys watch this thing. So I'm doing it as a bit. We are all guys. There are no women in the room. How's it feel, boys? All right. Rent functions similarly, where historically yearly rent has been 5% of the value of a property. Yearly company earnings are 5% of the market cap of a stock. Rent can accrue with little to no work by the landlord and is also subject to market forces and financial speculation. Let's stop at that because there's more, which is...
Well, I do want to give this due time, and it might be.
Totally. And it like often is, I think.
I think so. It
Although
doesn't.
usurious is interesting. I wouldn't have thought of land rent being usurious in the way of...
Thanks.
It's question 3. Like charging interest on a loan or charging twice for something. I mean, there is a way in which you could be charging twice for something, right? You could be charging people to live somewhere that has no other justification for you charging them that money than the fact that you own it. But this seems to me to be a question of rental price and not of rent per se. But maybe I'm jumping the gun here.
I don't think that first of all, just because there is a correlation in percentage between usurious activities and another industry, it means that it is usurious.
Well,
Okay,
yeah.
So for the first point,
Yeah, that's goofy. There's 5% of crunchy nuggets in a crunch bar. Vis-a-vis the chocolate doesn't mean it's a usurious candy.
I like the little jab at Trent Horn that they added in here, but what, I do think that there are occasions of unjust renting, but still, St. Thomas's principle, I think, is really important here. That does get carried through into the larger, broader tradition, and that's that something is usurious. Something has a potential of being usurious when the thing is consumed in its use. So you can't charge twice for coffee.
Yeah.
You just have to return the coffee that was drunk. Whereas with land, it perpetuates into the future without being upheld by any man. It's just there. It's created by God. A house is different, and there can be real cheating and real negligence, but I think that is a different sin than usury.
Yeah.
I do think that's cheating. So.
Yeah. So to the more general question, it's like, so he says a few things about rent in the feudal period. Historically, peasants made nearly all the modifications themselves to the land, with knights-only service providing protection. I find it dubious at best that this justifies the servility and taxes imposed on the peasants, especially given the rampant absenteeism of lords in the Middle Ages, and especially in the modern era, 1700, 1800. Well, yeah, sure. But I think that all we're saying is that when you rent out the land, you are talking about giving a common good to someone.
Right.
The land is given to all of us.
Right.
So you cannot simply make money on the fact that you own it. That is not sufficient. It's not a sufficient justification to say, well, I own this land, therefore give me X.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. And so, but because houses are consumable to a degree, like they wear down, then there is the maintenance costs are real, and there is an exchange within just rent between the person who is providing the maintenance of a house and then the person who is living there.
Right.
And that has to be prudentially decided. I think most people are dishonest about this because the reason I don't think most Catholics should be landlords, because the way that landlording is profitable is not by caring for tenants. The way that landlording is profitable is by not caring for tenants. That's what makes it very profitable. Because if you're actually thinking about this in terms of justice, you're saying, okay, and there's other calculations, right? There could be a lot of labor that went into building the house. There could be a lot of labor that went into acquiring the property. There can be a lot of labor into maintaining it. There are costs, right? So there is grounds for an equitable exchange between the tenant and the landlord. But number one, there's a cap on this, right? Which is why I think, and we've said it before, I don't think any situation of indefinite rent is justifiable. If you're a landlord, you need to be talking to your tenants and saying, like, this rent is for the sake of solving a situational problem for you, right? That you need somewhere to live, but it is not supposed to create like an indefinite difficulty for you. You need to own. So what price can we set it at where, given your work, you are able to accrue enough for the sake of owning your own property? This is especially important now where we have no commons, right? So when we talk about the feudal period, the distinction is very different because we had use of the land for the sake of productive property.
So I got a question kind of along these lines, because I've had friends that, owning rentals and wanting to follow Christ, they approach their tenants and say, what can we do so that you own this? Can we make this into a land contract? Where's the price? Right. Exactly. And they are completely uninterested in owning, which, sure, that is just a feature of today. Nobody wants to own. Nobody wants to have responsibility over things. Nobody wants to be able to claim things as their own because they don't have in mind that when you own, you can give. Well, and then you start to really cultivate this economy.
You're asking a great question. And it's the case that when your ownership isn't productive, it doesn't have that same kind of motivation. It's like, we're not talking about a clear, if you're making money at a job and then because you make that money and pay the rent, it means that you don't have to worry about fixing the roof. That might be a self-sufficient little ecosystem there. Whereas when we compare it to rents in the Middle Ages, we're talking about people having use of the land for the sake of productive property. So there's a stimulation towards ownership where there's distribution of productive property. And sorry for those on the podcast. Our boy Josiah is adjusting the lights. It's so tough. He tries to do everything subtly, and we just like cannot. I have to comment.
I see it. I must say something. Yeah.
Anyways, but that's I just wanted to note that we're in a very distinct period of rent where we're literally just renting. I mean, besides like whatever's left of the sharecroppers, we are pretty much renting houses.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely predominant in most of our minds. But yeah, I think this is just a struggle. I don't really have a good answer for it.
But in answer to your question of like,
yeah.
well, what if they're not interested?
Yeah.
I think there's two possible reasons for that, right? On the one hand, it might be sloth on the part of the tenant.
Right.
And then that's a really tough position to be in. And if you really discern like, okay, I am in a position where in attempting to be just, what I'm really doing is stopping this family from maturing, then I think they're probably not good tenants. I mean, I don't know how to say it. It's like, like you, I don't think that Catholic landlords should be in a situation of essentially encouraging sloth where there is genuine ownership possible.
Yeah.
Now, that's one possibility. I've seen it before, for sure. On the other hand, it could be the case that like opportunities for ownership really are difficult and sort of momentous given the great evils of our society. And actually rent provides, like a person charging you just rent is providing you with like a real security.
Yeah.
Very similar to the way the lords of the Middle Ages were providing
Some of
security
them.
and
Yeah.
continuity. Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's wickedness.
And I do think, kind of like the lords of Middle Ages, who were once warlords, who, as Christ said, lorded it over the people, and then converted and found a new system within it. So a lot of our landlords are going to have to do the same thing today. So,
absolute chicken noodle.
Next question.
We got some questions in the live chat.
All
If you guys are
right.
interested.
Let's go to our live chat.
Why are you guys at work? Sorry. We set this up
It's the
so
feast
that
of
everybody.
Saint Nicholas.
Oh, that's why. No.
Didn't you hear Joseph Biden say that on this our hallowed feast?
Wow, did he really?
Hey, he's Catholic. What's up?
Also, Alex is coming in with your coffee.
No
Oh my
way!
gosh.
He's the man. Alex, you are absolutely.
He's a jolly good fellow.
No
For he's a
way.
jolly good fellow. For
Thanks,
he's
brother.
a jolly good fellow.
Look, there's sprinkles.
Which sprinkles.
Ah,
Nobody can deny.
This is so special.
All right, Josiah. Happy feasting. Let's go.
All right. Somebody asks, what are your thoughts on college 529 funds? Is that a similar predicament to a 401k?
What is it?
Yeah. 529.
Oh, yeah, of course. 529.
Well, couple things. One, those sprinkles are really good. Two, it does have this very similar predicaments. It is a nice way of saving. I haven't looked for college because it is tax deductible.
So it's like it is tax deductible fund specifically for saving for your kids'
For
college,
education.
For education purposes. Okay.
Yeah, and it can cover everything from like housing to meal plans on campus, as long as it's going kind of to that university institution or for the sake of higher, I believe, just higher education. Yeah, it's great to be able to find your ways out of savings. I would say just a couple things. One, I'm not sure the limits of your control that you have within it. I suspect it's more like a Roth IRA where or at least a self-directed 401k, which case if you can buy real gold, that's great. If you can just leave it as cash, that's great too. But I wouldn't try and hedge the system more than that. The second thing is third thing, after the sprinkles and that comment was that there's a limitation of where you can use those funds.
Right.
I don't think we can receive them at the College of St. Joseph the Worker. I have to
not
check.
until we're accredited.
I think it's accreditation.
Yeah.
So but every college pretty much is accredited today. There's very few that are not. So that's not really much of a point.
But there's a penalty,
Yeah.
right? Presumably, if you put money into that and then take it out for reasons other than higher education.
Yeah, which I guess is the last point. Are you sure you want your kids to go to college? And
yeah,
I personally am not saving any money for our kids to go to college. Not so much because we don't value college. We do think that there's significant problems in higher education today. And not because the College of St. Joseph Worker would pay for our kids. They wouldn't. But primarily because that is the point where the child is starting to find, where their first priority is to find their vocation, and then also their apostolate within this world too. And so if we do have a particularly bright child who is supposed to go off and study the church fathers, say, that we would want to be able to help him out, jumpstart as best we could. But it is a decision that I think is going to primarily be found both in the conjunction of his desires and other people's recognition of it, which means scholarships too. Mm-hmm. And we're just not banking on our kids being that special person that is going for higher education. What are you doing for Felix?
I'm definitely not saving for college. I mean,
Yeah.
for a very similar reason. It's like, well, especially with this particular 529, they said?
Yeah.
I mean, the difficulty that I think is that, generally speaking, all of these devices that we have for saving and spending generally, because there's a certain way in which you are already spending for college, right, when you do this. The trouble with spending is that it commits us to the product in a very spiritual way.
Perfect point, yeah.
And I see this all the time. Like when people, I mentioned this with consulting firms because this is my current rant. Like when people spend a bunch of money for a consulting firm to tell them what to do in a situation, even if it's bad advice, they have to now fight against the very force of the money down, right? They have spent money on a product, and this puts you into a psychological expectation of getting the thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so my trouble with that is like, well, I've got a 3-year-old and maybe he wants to be like a stunt man, you know, the guys that motorcycles. So if I start now saying, hey,
like Tim Clementi,
exactly like Tim.
Yeah.
Maybe if I start right now putting money away for college, because I'm like, he's going to be a Harvard man and learn how to sneer, then turns out he wants to be a stuntman, and all of a sudden I have spent, as it were, I have sort of committed my labor towards an idea which is now at war with the reality in front of me. And even if I'm able to say like, well, shucks, go be a stuntman, kid, and I'm gonna take the hit on paying all those taxes now, or however the penalty works. Even if I can swallow that, I don't like the idea of being in a relationship where I have to swallow my own decisions with any kind of pain because my child is free. Mm-hmm. So that's basically it. Now, on the other hand, I don't know how this works. Maybe you know, your kid is 15 and he's wants to go to MIT to learn how to make viruses for the world, and you're into it.
Spicy Jones over here.
And so we
disavow that. Take us down.
Sorry. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then maybe there's a clear, like, now this is a mechanism to achieve something that like we're in a sort of unity for.
Yeah.
But I find that a lot of these, colleges are very nefarious in the way that they kind of preach, promote, advertise, and maintain their own necessity in a world in which they are obviously becoming more and more useless.
That's right.
It's like, don't let them do that to you by starting to save for them in a general way. Like, the presumption, looking at the world right now, should be that kids probably shouldn't go to college. Most colleges are probably useless. So the idea of having a bunch of cash that you're not using now for the sake of that possibility, I think, is not a good idea.
Yeah.
It seems to me like first determine that your child has a particular vocation. This is just, now I'm saying what you said.
Yeah.
determine that they have an intellectual vocation, and then save. And now, of course, you've got less time, so it's less effective. But when have we ever said that we're giving you more effective means for anything? We've never said that.
But you'll be happy. You'll be fighting
you'll be
along
happy,
with your kids.
and then your
It's
kid
great.
will have to go to, This is the other thing I should mention
Okay.
with college, but I'll just do it really quick.
Yeah.
If your kid wants to go to college for some reason, it's a great time to wash dishes, like to make extra money if you
Mhm.
don't have the money, So there's that. The other thing is, increasingly, college is becoming really weird where, like, if you're an Ivy League or if you're one of the big schools, which unfortunately does have a kind of the ability to get into those schools does say something about your vocation. What I mean is, insofar
Yeah,
as there's
sure.
any rigor left, and we're not just buying degrees,
Yeah.
as famous people do,
Yeah.
there is the ability to say, yeah, all I could get into was community college and then this state college if I pay this much, is at least possibly a sign that you're not supposed to go to college if you're basically trying, especially as just education declines. It's like now you get to go and have extended adolescence for 4 years. But if you get into, say, Harvard, there's at least a possibility, if you're not just a rich guy buying a degree for your kids, there's at least a possibility that the acceptance to the university is a sign of your intelligence and not just the fact that you're the appropriate race. Or I gotta stop doing this. In that case, though, they pay for your school. I mean, you don't pay money for Ivy Leagues, right? This is what I'm learning.
Is that new this year?
No, you just like the scholarship's available to you.
Oh,
if you're
right.
Actually,
If you're actually gifted in that way, yeah.
just go. You just get them.
Yeah.
They've got billions of dollars. They don't need to get tuition. They're speculating on land.
Yeah, they still have a high tuition though. Whether or
really?
not. Yeah.
Does that just
absolutely.
allow them to make bigger asks when they set up scholarship funds? I mean, like if I was at college and I already had billions of dollars in endowment, I would certainly keep tuition costs high, precisely because when I, am justifying my making tons of money on the market, it would be vis-a-vis a tuition cost that is arbitrarily set as high as it is.
Yeah, somebody actually wrote an article about this, that if you just had, if students stopped paying tuition at Harvard and they just used their $40 billion endowment, they could train all of their students for the next 129 years or something like that.
Right.
So I think,
So
I don't
presumably
really know.
there's another reason for keeping costs high that's not involving hitting the bottom line.
Yeah, I know at least. Yeah, so I'm not sure. Maybe it is just kind of the Americana spirit of growth and, business models and whatever else, and this thing's working, so let's keep going. I do know this is now completely uninteresting to everybody listening, but
Yeah, we're talking
for
about
St. John's College at Oxford, that they were going to stop charging their students for their fees and their rent because they had so much money, and all the other colleges at the university said, no, you're going to make us look bad and you're going to get all the best students.
Yeah,
And
well,
so
but, you're right, because in
yeah.
a world without God and without values, monetary price increasingly signifies worth.
Yeah.
Goodness. It's like, how do I know I'm at good college? Because it's expensive college.
Yeah, something like
How
that.
do I know I've
yeah.
got good coffee? Because it's expensive coffee.
Yeah.
And so when you have enough money to not care, you can set prices not because it's part of your sort of financial scheme, though of course it helps, but because it continues to signify a value that is increasingly suspect.
Yep. That's it.
All right.
Next
All right.
Can you guys
Take that
answer
money out.
question 3 on that sheet?
Number 3.
From the Discord?
No, on the sheet you have, it's highlighted.
Oh, yeah. Does the church... Okay, I'll read it. Does the church have any teaching on intellectual property, copyright, patents, piracy, illegal downloads of documents and software, etc.?
It's a great question.
You wouldn't steal a purse.
You would.
Go ahead.
Not that I know of. I'm not sure if the church has ever explicitly addressed these things. You could probably just borrow all the principles that the tradition has given us for fraud in discussing these things. But
I mean, like I have a very open-hearted attitude. Does the church have any teaching on this? Dude, you're the church. Teach on it.
yeah.
People
But
don't
the
like
fraud
this.
thing is pretty open-ended because there's a lot in the tradition that's open for stealing in times of necessity. So it's not just like no, it says don't steal, that type of thing. But I don't know, and a lot of those piracy stuff is just for luxury items anyway. So it'd be really hard to justify that.
Well, can I say something on it, because I think
Yeah.
the question might have something to do with our discussion on simony, where we've certainly made some pretty general comments
That's
that are
true.
not justifiable
I see.
vis-a-vis a
Nice.
magisterial document.
Yep.
Namely, that there is something wrong about selling ideas,
Yeah.
selling our talks,
Yeah.
especially of a theological or philosophical nature.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's a brief point to acknowledge that, this is extrapolation from principles concerning simony, right? Which is that you can't sell holy things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's partially because holy things are ultimately gratuitous things. They are from the grace of God. By the grace of God, they are holy. And so to insert a sort of blockade, as it were, is ineffective. You can't really do it. But to even pretend that you can sort of block grace by putting a price on it is wrong. So the priest cannot be paid for a mass, right?
Yes.
Even while he can be given a gift for saying a mass.
Yep.
Right? He cannot make the mass dependent on the reception of a particular gift.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
So in a similar sense, I don't see why. And I actually had a great discussion with Alex. Did you meet Alex, furniture maker?
I was out of town.
You were at D.L. Schindler's funeral.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rest in peace.
Speaking of masses, if any priests are listening, please say a mass for his soul. D.L. Schindler was a great intellectual father to many of us. So, yeah.
Alex was saying,
the furniture maker,
that he didn't like our stuff on simony, but then after discussion, he said, well, maybe it's just a hard teaching. So I think I got Alex.
Yeah, I would say, just in terms of simony, what are the things that we know for sure in the tradition? Well, we got the definition. That's in the Catechism. All right. So no buying and selling of holy objects. What else do we know for sure? That things have, there was a really, tight times throughout the Middle Ages where often there's the condemnation of buying, selling bishoprics, prayers, ultimately indulgences. Mm-hmm. What else do we know? Well, we have that deafening line from St. Thomas that money takes a place for where friendship lacks. We are going out on a limb and trying to apply principles on when we're trying for ourselves primarily, first and foremost. You're welcome to follow us if you'd like, but this is where our conscience is leading on asking for honoraria when we talk, particularly because it has to do with matters of God.
Yeah, I mean, think about it.
So whereas you have, I just want to kind of put this in the scale of where we're committed to on these things.
Yeah.
That one is a conscience thing because we're trying to apply principles. Whereas you take something more like the 401k, and the tradition is just so much more clear on speculation. Mm-hmm. She's just been condemning it from the beginning, and that is just a traditional. That is a prime example of speculation. Mm-hmm. So that one we're confident with. This is kind of a conscience thing for us.
And this is not to negate it, because the conscience is always the voice of God in the person. And it is responding to reality. It's our point of contact with reality. So when we say that it's a matter of conscience, we're not saying it the way that,
it's personal. It's subjective.
Like to do.
Yeah, it's not that. Yeah,
it's so funny. Okay, I'm not gonna tell stories about it, but
Ruben and I are gonna have a long discussion on conscience when we turn to our next podcast series.
Yeah, that's right.
It's on political saints.
Political saints. I'm excited. But conscience, where are we? Right. The question is, how do we limit holiness, like the holy object? Because we can't buy and sell it. But it seems to me obvious that if I open the Word of God, which I did not create, no labor of mine went into it, quite literally the Word of God, the incarnate Son, was given, right? So I open it, and I do labor in the field here, like in the field of the Word. I spend time on reading it, thinking about it, and coming to conclusions about it, right? And then I write those down. So there's labor involved, not denying a certain amount of labor. But this being said, the idea that I could believe that I have a true conclusion about the scriptures, which means about God's plan for you and your salvation, and say it's going to cost you $500 to hear it, does seem abhorrent. And in this regard, I find also abhorrent the USCCB's and various institutions' propriety rights and intellectual property rights that they hold on things like the Catechism, on things like the biblical translation itself, and on all manner of documents. And I find this actually extremely scandalous. And I do not think that it is justified by a claim of like the protection of the integrity of the translations, because I think there's a way you can have that right quite without charging what they charge in order to buy the use of a translation, the use of a document, that sort of thing.
Right.
Okay. Granted, none of this stuff is really enforced, but I do think it's quite scandalous. And in a similar sense,
No, it is enforced actually.
well enforced, I should say.
Well,
when's the last time you called the Vatican to use a English translation of an encyclical? You know what I mean?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, I mean, it's in any sold product, you do have to ask permission. So,
right, and because they're trying to
like Verbum, this is like what Andrew had to go through when he was creating that awesome Bible software.
Yes,
everybody should really use.
Well, you know what I'm saying. I'm saying that like there are things that are given where while you can. So let's go back to the talks and then apply it, because what I can say though is, because of the labor it takes to give a talk, that there is a certain amount of material needs that make it possible for me to give the talk, right? Like, if my needs are not met, I can't do the labor, and I can't necessarily do the travel, etc. Yeah. And this is very similar to the question of like the Mass. It's like the priest, you might say, Father, I want a Mass said at this time and at this place. And he's going to say something like, well, he's never going to be allowed to say, that costs $100, right? But he might tell you in good faith, look, it's going to take some gas money to get out there. I'm going to have to rearrange my schedule. This money would make it possible because of these various expenditures. And then you say, I would like to make it possible. Right?
Yeah, I still think that's... I mean, let's make that even more definite, because I think that's dangerous, and we just kind of get in the same rut of thinking in terms of transactions. If it is like not, because the majority of these requests for masses to be said are just at your home parish.
Yeah, that's true.
Where it actually doesn't cost hardly anything. No. That wafer is 3 cents.
Just put the name on the altar.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we just gotta need to sit there first, and if there's like some exciting thing like we're doing a retreat for our students or something like that, and we're going to go up into the middle of Appalachia, approaching first with a mind cognizant of St. Paul's teaching that the preacher deserves his wages. We say, hey, Father, here's the money to be able to get down, and thanks for here's a little gift for taking the time. If you can, would you please? Yeah. I think that's appropriate. I mean, it does. You like taking a leap out of faith on the side of the speaker or the teacher or the preacher is something real, but that needs to be taken first. And I don't really think that. I think the Lord really will bless that heart ready to bring the gospel forward.
And you know what? Yeah, man, the whole like Catholic speaker circuit thing. Like that's an abomination, obviously. Like people making money on like essentially a Catholic imitation of a popular speaker, like culture, is just terrible. It's terribly scandalous. Everyone should stop doing that. Everyone should have free gifts of Catholic theology if they have it. Because the other thing about a talk is if you've already written, then at some point your labor has been paid for. What I mean is like,
If you're reusing the same talk,
yeah,
absolutely,
like
that's
you've
true.
already been sustained in your production of the talk.
That's right.
Like obviously you're alive. It didn't kill you to do it. So now that you're saying like, okay, well this is a piece of intellectual property, and every time I, give it out there, I want $10,000. I mean, that's insane. You've already been paid. It's usurious and simoniacal. Simoniacal.
Yeah.
So that has to stop. All that Catholic speaking has to stop. We can't charge for the word like that.
Yeah.
There's no way. And what that would do is it would weed out all the grifters, because if they believed that, like Taylor Marshall, for instance, believed that it was a sin to essentially charge for the truth, as he sees it, then I think it would just make it a less profitable enterprise to, for instance, be horrible and blasphemous towards Holy Mother Church for a living, for instance. That sort of thing.
Yeah, that I get that.
I can see it becoming not a profitable opportunity for people. Only the saints would apply. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, who are the people left once you say you can't charge for it? Well, it's the people who really think it's true, really, all the way down. And that is such an important part of Christianity, is that when you take away, like the laws of Christianity against simony, are so special, because what they're doing is they are forcing us to look at the holy thing itself and to ask ourselves, do we believe in the efficaciousness of this relic of the saint? Do we actually believe that the gospel is true and that is efficacious towards the salvation of everyone to whom we share it? If we believe that, right, then it is its own motivation. I mean, read Paul. This is like, or Jeremiah, even better. Like, what happens when he gets a word from the Lord? He cannot not say it. It burns him like a fire in his bones. He has to say it. When we make it available for sale, when all of your wise speculations on Thomas or on scriptures are suddenly available for sale, whether through advertising or through speaker's fee or however you're making your money, then you no longer have that natural or really gracious check on your own sincerity. You no longer are saying, like, do I believe it to be so intrinsically true, so intrinsically worthwhile, that I will give it no matter what? Instead, you're saying, well, I don't need to consider that in particular because I have a gate on giving it, and the gate is a subscription, or the gate is a payment. Okay, so all I'm saying is that I think a lot of the mess of the kind of Catholic Christian hot take industrial complex would be greatly mitigated by an application of the Church's teaching on simony to what you might call the weirdo tradition of lay popular preaching, which has become insane. Does the Church have any teaching on this in particular? No. I mean, again, we are doing the good kind of speculating. But I think that anyone who really sits down and just thinks about like what it would mean to really believe in God and the Church, I think it's not far off to say that things like sharing the truth generally would be considered with the same kind of reverence that we consider the bodies of saints, say.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, that's my
my
rant.
I would toss in there. I don't think in saying this, we're not saying that people should not travel around and preach the good news.
Oh yeah.
That needs to happen. It's a particular shame that the laity are doing it predominantly today, or at least they're the most popular guys in many of our minds.
I wonder.
It does seem like a clerical role. But I think it's just what's, where we are right now and what's required. Anyways, all right. Next question.
Yep. I'll read one more. Just say it. This is Thomas's Rules for Investing. I've heard a few different episodes of the podcast, a reference to the 3 principles of St. Thomas for good investing.
Where to look for them?
Where can I find those principles?
Yeah, I'd say look at De Regimine 1.15. Look at the Secunda Secundae 77, particularly the first article. De Malo 13. And as well as Secunda Secundae 78 too. So I hope in this second season we've kind of clarified these a little bit more, primarily with the conversations of speculation, of the attempt of, with all investments, are to dignify labor and if not own others. The fact that within all good investing, there has to be that real, true intentionality. The first primary thing that you're trying to do is building up the kingdom of God. So this is obviously John Paul II says this explicitly. St. Thomas couches this in his conversation on benevolence, which is something that's required to have beneficence, and then ultimately to be invested not just with your money, but like spiritually, like say that your whole body and soul is in this as well. So take a read around those. I do think that all of these principles are then carried in to John Paul II, which we've spent a lot of time with this.
Yeah, and again,
time,
and I think it's
brought to a magisterial level as well.
And it's precisely this that I think the church is waking up to. I mean, why is it that the Pontifical Academy of the Social Sciences is writing about good investment?
Right.
You know, the Spirit awakens the church to the problems of the day. I mean, the Spirit is what is in history. Like, it's our way into the reality that confronts us. And it just seems clear, like, what's the conversation? Like, what's the living church encountering? Well, you know, it's really not questions of, I don't know, say, salvation by faith or works, for instance.
Yeah.
It is, in fact, questions of investment. And I think paying attention to the Spirit is so important, knowing the signs of the times. Like, we have got, as the church, we are the church, we have got to figure out how to break ourselves from this love of mammon that forms the basis of stability in our society.
Right.
And it's not an accident that the church is not like a moralizing entity. It doesn't just sit there being like, all right, let's figure out some more rules. It's like there is a issue that presents itself to the body of Christ, and there is a response. The Spirit responds to the attacks of hell, and that's why, you know, we got to get on board here. This is why, again, Papa Frank, I call on you to condemn the stock market.
We're waiting.
We're here. I predicted it would be, I think, 3 years till the condemnation.
That's right.
Time's ticking.
I said 4.
6 months are up.
Okay, happy Feast of St. Nicholas, everyone. We are asking questions and answering them. What's next, Josiah? Give us a softball. No, I'm just kidding. Give us anything.
Oh, okay, good. Are there any historical examples of distributed... Sorry, hold on.
Stop drinking. It's like 10.
The delay in my headphones. Are there any historical examples of distributism working at scale or over an extended period of time? I'm not aware of Belloc using or Chesterton citing any.
Oh, well, how about Pius XI in Quadragesimo Anno? So let's up the ante from Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton. I mean, what you find, and actually Belloc does point out a number of historical examples. I mean, he says that early America was such an example of this, where the land was so plentiful that people did have ownership over the means of production. So he mentions that. He says America up until recently, which is the same thing that Pius XI says, where he ushers us back to a time prior to the industrial complex that man created in the 19th century, really, in the century prior. And so we would just point to the Middle Ages, actually, as a time from, around Charlemagne's death up into the enclosure movement, where you're talking about centuries there. And another kind of side to all of this is that within that period, you don't find utopia. You don't find perfection. But what you do find Pius XI says is something better than what we have. Now, Pius XI is also writing 100 years ago, and you know, things
Yeah.
are better then in many ways than they are now. So
Yeah, distributism is one of those words that unfortunately it's easy to take from the standpoint of modern industrial capitalism and then to view it as a alternative system. And that is a little bit misleading, right? Because then what you end up doing is saying like, okay, how, given the conditions of modern industrial capitalism, do I create a distributist system, and then show me how I can do that scaled up the way industrial capitalism scales
Right.
up, and show me the way it can have longevity or something like that. And then you end up looking at worker cooperatives, say, or employee-owned businesses, which are legitimate, but they have there's a certain misunderstanding of what distributism is. Distributism is describing a state in which property is distributed. The means of production are distributed among as many people as possible. It is
Right.
always describing a dynamic movement, totally understanding that there are times in which a further distribution of property in a given circumstances would be neither good nor desirable, right? So for instance, if it is good for someone, given their condition in life, to be renting and not owning, right?
Right.
Think about disease, think about disability, think about, we are not actually a people who could, or it would be desirable to attain a sort of libertarian ideal of a kind of not a frozen or static distribution of property.
Right, absolutely. This is not ideological. It's
Yeah.
not just distribution for the sake of distribution.
And so what that means is, in answer to this question, it's like, yes, on the one hand, you can look to the stability within the Middle Ages by which obviously institutions tended towards ownership, and by which small-scale ownership was real, in which use ownership and common ownership were both real,
Yep.
and in which rights were asserted over and against lords, and like rights of customary use were asserted over and against lords who broke with that carefully woven a very diversely woven fabric of the social order. What I mean to say is, you could take the king and his men to court for as a peasant. And this is one of my
and
favorite,
win.
because and this is one of my favorite parts of reading Before Church and State, which everyone should read. Is just Andrew is continuously bringing up times where peasants successfully sue the king in parliamentary court, I think, within medieval France, on the basis of their customary rights being infringed by the king's men. And this wasn't some kind of systematic, centralized plan for society. This is what happens when people are generally all pursuing the same peace, the same faith, the same work, right? Where the king or the ruler or the one who has power over you is understood as being involved in the same dynamic movement towards the sanctification of the world. But what that must mean is that when they screw up, they're as much at fault as if you screw up. Like, you're all part of the same mission here. Okay, so all of it, which is to say, when we ask for examples of successful distributism, we should also be looking for simply a successful small farmer in our area, because do they have a distribution of property? Yes. Do they own productive property? Yes. Do they own it in such a way that they are distributing its excess according to Catholic social teaching? I sure hope so. And does it have longevity to it? Right? Yes. But then you ask the question, could it be scaled up? It's like, well, more people could do it. Sure. But if you think like there's a small farm system that could be centrally applied to a large industrial capitalist nation, it's like you're speaking nonsense at that point. Right? What you need to imagine is, where distributism has any success, it's because it spreads in the way that families spread. Like, you have another child, and then you have another child, and they are given that same value and doing that same thing. It is not this like, and that makes it tough, I think, because you have to A, look into history pretty deeply, but B, you also have to be very you have to risk the whole like Hobbit critique, that like most of the successes are by nature going to be wherever property is properly distributed, and that's by nature going to be a lot of small scale successes.
That's right. Cool. Yeah, but I think we can back apply where Belloc makes that references, but he does give like a list actually at some point. Maybe it's in Economics for Helen. think it might be.
But
in
there's
there.
also like shared ownership of large machines, like
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with the workshop,
Mhm.
So you could try and give a community access to productive property there.
hmm
Should we hit the next one?
There's two questions that I think I could combine. It says, since a Catholic is due by justice to give his extra to the poor.
Yeah.
Man, if we just said that instead of superfluity, we would have had. Would have been great.
Mike Sullivan, he's been going around and giving talks about like everything that once you've provided for yourself, everything that's excessive just goes to the poor. Just like, oh, excessive. That's nice.
Excessive.
That's a nice word.
So much better.
Yeah.
Instead of, I'm always like
Yeah.
superfluity.
Yeah.
All right. But then the question is, how does that relate when one has a home loan? And there was another one in here.
Oh, good question. I like that question.
There's another one in here. Well, there's another one in here where it's a similar question, which is essentially like how do I apply these? How could I be liberal? I think it was. How can I have the virtue of liberality if I have debts? Which I think is a similar question.
Yeah, you know what? So these are great questions. You kind of take a basis from Leo the 13th of the man who saves up so as to buy land for his family and care for them. Okay, so awesome. In keeping with that principle, you are doing what you're doing. But there's always this worry of saving exclusively for yourself and for your family. A part of the common good you are, absolutely. But how do you begin to build up the habits of giving once you own everything outright or once you have paid off your last debts? That's one of these things where actually a budget might help you out quite a bit. I mean, I hate to be the budget guy, and I seldom actually am, but I think this is kind of one of the things that might be helpful for you is to actually track out how much you need to spend to pay just, your mortgage payments. If you want to try and beat it by a little bit, try and beat it by a little bit, but hitting all your other debts, and then seeing at the end what luxuries can you cut out of your budget so that you have more room, not for your tithes, because that's at the beginning, but for alms. Yeah. And if you can hit a place where you're giving more alms than tithes, that's great. Might not be where you are right now, but a good percentage of your monthly income, if you can, just have it there. But you always just need to be building up those habits, so that when you find those freedoms, you can then say, all this money that I was paying over here, I'm just going to plop that right into my alms column.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, we this happened early in season 1 where we were considering some of this, and I think what we absolutely condemn is the sort of Dave Ramsey approach where you do not give alms, you do not tithe.
Well, I think he says tithe, but not alms. Yeah.
Okay. That's weird. But okay.
Well, he's a Protestant. He doesn't really have that distinction. So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
He's not trying to merit forgiveness for his sins by giving money to poor people.
That's right.
Dude.
You're missing out.
It's funny though, sorry, Dave Ramsey, that is. Because sometimes he'll do this thing, which I find really, it's very Protestant, right? Because they forgive people's debts, right? So what they'll do is they'll save a bunch of money, and then they'll randomly forgive someone's debts, like medical debts, for instance.
Okay, cool.
Now it's not real forgiveness, right? Because the person it's only forgiveness if the person who owes, to whom the money is owed, forgives the debts. Right?
Totally. I actually just misunderstood what you were saying because I thought that
it's really a gift.
Yeah.
And it sort of works. It's more like substitution. Like you take their place, you pay
Wow.
There's something very penal substitution about it.
Yeah.
Okay, but then, so this is obviously great. Dave's awesome. Thanks for doing that, Dave. I'm sure you're just making people happy. But then, whenever he's asked to justify, like, well, why do this? He's always like, because it's so fun. It's just a good time. Which is to me amusing, because he's obviously riding on like the principles of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Which is that when
do the right
give
thing.
alms,
yeah.
right, we are restoring communion to the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Right? We are lifting up our brothers and
Yeah.
sisters who need us. And in doing that, we are meriting, right? Like we are building up treasure in heaven. But since there's this like weird suppressed thing where we can't be building it up,
Yeah.
then he thinks of it in the same terms that he sometimes talks about how fun it is to like buy a jet ski now that he's rich because he doesn't have debts. It's like the same thing. It's like, I get to buy jet skis. I get to give money. I get to have an awesome house. Which is why he'll say these insane things like, you can get whatever you want. You're rich now. No one should be ashamed of being rich in America. He'll say that. And then he'll simultaneously say, and you should give like nobody else. Give like a crazy person. It's going to be so fun. And it took me a while to realize, oh, these are the same category for him. Because there's no almsgiving. There's no obligation. It's just like, it's the fun that you can do with the excess. Which, granted, I mean, that's better than, being a hoarder. Totally. Dave's awesome. Happy he's having fun. All we're adding to the fun is that sort of Catholic, flagellation situation.
But that is fun too. I think
flagellation is fun. All right, we got it on record.
Notoriously,
flagellation is fun. Jacob said it.
Yeah. No, I'll stick to it. But there's this thing where I think I've probably said this before, but there's like, the reason why the word blessed and happiness are interchangeable in the scriptures is because they really are the same thing.
Totally.
When you're doing good things and you're fulfilling your obligations, you just are happier.
Yeah.
This is why, like, I feel so bad. I remember my past self sitting on the couch shaking, looking at stocks and stuff like that, feeling so much anxiety. And just like, it's kind of like, just you want to take my old hand, praise God, by his mercy. We've gone a little bit further, but it's just like, man, there's so much more peace. There's so much more joy. It's like actually this living like Jesus wants us to financially thing, which, I got a lot more room to have more fun in. It's actually like, it's scary in the moment, but once you're out of it, it's just so much better.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's kind of a quick appeal is that joy thing actually does point you that you're on the right track, or some sort of thumbprint that you're doing the right thing.
Well, we always pray for Dave Ramsey's conversion to the Holy Catholic Church.
Full submission under the Holy Father.
Do it now, do it fast, do it for your children. What's next?
J-Dog.
You want to talk about Islamic banking?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Sweet. That was easy.
I would say my buddy James Brigida wrote his doctorate over on this, and I never read it. I'm sorry, James. Yeah. I think he's running for state office in Virginia now. So if you're in Virginia, vote for James.
Vote for James. Nepotism for the win.
Oh,
how does one start someone on the good money principles if they're totally closed off?
Scream, you're going to hell unless you listen to me. Sorry, was it start someone on the good money principles?
It's the question was, it's very difficult to explain the common good ownership to folks who have been habituated into private property regime. Tips on rhetorical responses to objections like, wouldn't it be chaos? Assuming you can't sit them down and make them listen to the podcast.
I wouldn't even start there. I'd just say for folks that are the good, Republican Christian types who have been, quote unquote, financially responsible in American sense for their entire life, and who are unfamiliar with the church's teachings on financial issues, I would just say, get them where they already agree. They probably really do love Jesus Christ. They probably do, in some sense, want greater intimacy with him. They're not sure that there is even this category over here, and they're kind of probably scared to look over here as well. But you just start off with saying, look, this whole life is about growing in intimacy with Jesus Christ. We really do want to see his face more clearly. And praise be to God that he's given us ways of living a life that really does have greater intimacy with him. We know this full well, like within so many different categories in life. This protection around marriage and sex is very clear in many of our minds. The church has been very straightforward in condemning certain sexual acts, and there is still some really great clarity in other categories as well. And and those are not restrictive; they're freeing, and some of them are really well spelled out for us. And I would just kind of start with the easy stuff, with like liberality, saying, you know, there's always a purpose for money. You know, it's meant to be spent. It's not meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be building up, and just go from there. You know, and I think those have been pretty. You know, money's a placeholder. Always know what it's holding a place for. I think particularly that old Republican types, you know, they really obsess over budgeting, and so that one kind of sounds like a budgeting thing in a certain regard. And so it's low hanging fruit. That's where I'd start. And just be slow with them.
And in particular, I think the example was like, what if they think like distributed ownership leads to chaos?
I just wouldn't go there first. Is really my answer. But if you did want to go into the foray,
I think that again, if you're talking about, you know, some guy named like Rick, and he's as Jacob described, you might say, Rick, you know, you're a father, if he's a father. What do you want for your children? And he's going to describe various kinds of ownership, because love desires ownership in the beloved. I mean, that's just obvious. So he's going to say, well, I want them to have a good job, and I want them to, you know their way around the world and have skills and be able to live without, you know, fear. And I want them to have a home with a really big yard for the grandkids to play in. And I want to see them and visit them. And you know, there's these desires that fathers naturally have for their children, which all involve a desire for the other person to own. So I think the family, you know, marriage is described in the nuptial blessing as the one blessing that was not effaced by original sin, nor washed away by the flood. And so whenever I just personally am trying to reach someone who I think is cut off from the explicit teachings of the church, I don't despair. Instead, I remember that there is a place within the human experience where the church still speaks in an infallible and unquenchable manner, and that's within the family. And we have this on faith, like it was not effaced by original sin. Like that, those goods, those graciously given goods within marriage, are still available. Like we are never without a starting point. We never have to go into a vacuum and say, let's talk about what love is and why it is good to desire good things for your children. I mean, Jesus, he starts this as his premise. You desire good things for your children. What man among you, when his child asks for a fish, would give him a stone? So Jesus takes the natural love within a family as a starting premise that has not been effaced by original sin, and then says, now let's talk about God, right? And in a very similar sense, I'm just saying that, you know, ownership is, we desire ownership in the beloved, for the beloved. And all that Christianity is doing, at some level it's very simple, is trying to extend what is present in the family unto the ends of the earth.
Yep.
And so inviting people to extend themselves, to say, you are a father, and how good it is that you're a father. But you, in your money, in having power, could be a father to more. Like your paternity could increase, right? Yeah. Not just through money, obviously. There's through becoming a godfather, through just many means. But, you know, as Andrew would say, it's something like wherever you turn your power towards the weak, then you're a father, within the Christian understanding here. Yeah. Okay, so that's all I would say, is that try to find the place where they already know that gift is good and ownership should be distributed because it's there in the family. Yeah. And then ask them to extend that. And just pray before you do it.
Yeah. Nice. I like that.
Yeah, bro.
We just got a really spicy one if you want that.
Give it to us. We want
if the
spice.
IRS begins to revoke tax exemptions for Catholic organizations based on their disrespect for the new Marriage Act, is there an argument for withholding paying taxes?
Wow. Great question.
Yeah.
First of all, are you already paying tax? Who's paying taxes? Are you serious?
What are you, Trump?
I didn't even think about needing to do an episode on this. We should not be. No, I'm kidding.
For legal reasons, that's a joke.
Yeah. You know, this is just a really spicy one throughout the tradition. I guess we've kind of talked about taxes already in the tithing episode.
Well, I think even on season 1, didn't we have something specifically on taxes?
I don't know.
Sorry, guys.
Brains
are mushy.
I think so. Taxes already have a really negative place in the tradition. At least taxes is the way that we have them today, where they're just, you never hear what they're going for. You don't really know what's happening with your power. It's just kind of taken from you every time you fill up at the gas station, and that was actually a similar problem to what was facing the Christians in the early church. And Tertullian actually had a long homily on this, where he said, why are you paying taxes? And that's his main question. It's like, what is the real thing that's motivating you? Is it fear of the army? And he's asking that. Is it fear of the army? Well, then you shouldn't do it. You should not pay taxes in that regard, because you're not doing the thing that you're doing for a good reason. You're doing it out of fear. You're doing it out of protectionism, especially when you should be trusting in the Lord. And he said, but he ultimately kind of reins that back and says, if this is more of a positive desire that you are doing to sustain the peace, then you could continue to give. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I think that we're definitely at that place where Tertullian is already, and the tax exempt status of a church would only heighten that place. But I think we could get pretty creative with how we handle a situation like that. Okay, no, this is all speculative, right? So I can just be free to have fun.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything he's about to say is hypothetical.
Okay, so what would change substantially if our local parish started to be taxed from their profits? You know, we would run it out of as maybe an LLC or something like that, I guess, with partnerships between the priest and the bishop. Okay, so first of all, you can still give, but it wouldn't necessarily be to the organization, or there would have to be some sort of fraternal organization like a 501c8 that would, you maybe still be taxed on it, and the church would, you would still be taxed on it. No, C8, C7. I gotta ask my buddy Skylar. That would then be able to receive the funds and then utilize them for divine worship. The biggest thing actually that would be taxed would be the investment accounts of the church, which probably shouldn't exist already, which, you know, as we've argued. So there might be some actual benefits to this. It's just that you wouldn't get your deductions from your taxes when donating at the end of the year. But that's fine.
Totally. Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, I'm not trying to be edgy here. It just seems like it is far worse that we've been so integrated in the 501c3 system.
Yeah.
Than it is that we should pay some taxes. Because what we have done is substantially thought of parishes as nonprofits and dioceses as large nonprofits.
Yeah.
And we are very beholden to the state in certain ways because of our 501c3 status.
And as a result, we've started to actually think of it as an entity apart from us.
Totally. Like, so people
and it's like,
give
that
to
is
church and they can be motivated by tax write-offs. Like,
totally.
Well, I'm going to give the rest of the church because otherwise I'm paying in taxes, which is obviously not the motivation with which a Christian should give to his church.
No, you got to think about your church as you think about your home. When I go and I buy a new table and chairs or something like that, or wood to make it, I don't think, man, I really wish I had a tax write-off for that purchase. You know, I just do it. You don't even think about it. You just buy what is needed. Yeah. And that's the same thing with your church.
Yeah, if it were the case that the government were to say, because of your non-compliance with the sort of sexual norms of our society, you are no longer going to be able to give your donors a tax write-off.
Yeah.
And pay taxes. That is a state that I would desire for the church.
Yeah.
Because the alternative, of course, is that there is a financial system in which we are being treated as complicit with the norms of society. So it's like, okay, what does it mean to be retained in our 501c3 status? Well, it means that we're being recognized as a sort of an institution within liberalism, which is basically like, look, we've decided the culture is going, the society as at large has decided on these new sexual norms. You, as an institution, have no public voice. It's not like what you're saying is allowed to change anything. You are tolerated as essentially an idiosyncratic 501c3 with a particular mission.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is when we enter into economic systems, we also are entering into habitual systems. So why is it that these contradictions haven't come to light? Well, because the church can only speak so much and do so much before they lose the tax exempt status, right? Like the 501c3 is always like held over their heads. It's like, well, if you get too political, the argument goes, then you're not really tax exempt. But what does that mean within liberalism? It means shut up, church, right? Because to get too political is the kind of liberal code for saying things that matter, actually affecting the social order.
Yeah.
Condemning usury in a way that means that we don't have banks the way we have banks.
Yeah.
For instance.
Yep.
And so long as we assent to being a 501c3 among 501c3s, we're always, especially in our leaders and our bishops, going to face the temptation to believe about the church what the state says about the 501c3 corporation, which is that, it is doing some good and is therefore tolerated in its idiosyncrasies, and is ultimately sort of motivated in doing certain works that the state doesn't do by not having to pay taxes.
Right.
Like essentially it's saying like, well, you're already achieving this particular goal of the state, so you're already in a sense paying your taxes by taking care of the poor, say.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Or giving some people some sort of psychological stability in which they can operate better in society.
But then Marx is right about the church, that it is an opiate, that it's like, well, you've just been annexed to the work of the kind of corporate state tyranny.
That's right.
Like the corporate state tyranny looks at the church and says, okay, yeah, you're basically providing people with something that apparently they need.
Yep.
You're making people basically conforming like to the difficulties of society. You're providing solace. And in that sense, you work kind of as like, well, we can get more out of people. We can do greater manipulations because they've got their church,
That's absolutely correct.
And this is like, I'm talking systemically. Yeah. I'm not saying like maybe there is some, some vicious central kind of characters.
No. You don't need that.
This.
I just mean like this. Supply that.
We talk about this all the time. Like, well, the church. What is the church in America? And people say, well, it's what do they say? Like a therapeutic deism or something like that.
Yeah.
But what that means for people to view God and their relation to Him as therapy vis-a-vis a real world where they're hurt means that the church in its mission has been annexed to the operations of the world.
Mm-hmm. Getting people up and going again so as to operate better within it rather than fundamentally changing it.
And as long as we're there thinking like, oh no, we're going to lose our 501c3 status. And this is why I think there's such great profound truth to this. Pope Francis and many have said like that the church should be poor. Because when you're poor, you don't have a lot to lose. This is the way it goes. And I'm not talking about poverty in the sense of destitution. I think when they're talking about poverty, they're talking about living within your needs, within your means.
Mm-hmm.
What does the poor church, right, with minimal sort of operations, who's out of insurance, who's out of market investments, who's not simply trying to imitate the 501c3s of the world, who's not like a massive employer or something like that, that church has so much less to lose. Like that's the kind of church that when someone is wicked in their midst can just say it, right? They don't have to like move a priest to another thing and then like make sure the lawyers are happy and then go through, worry about the inevitable suing and the insurance claims and all this. And so operate as essentially, scaredy cats that are managing That was my nice term.
I liked it.
They don't have to do that anymore because they're poor.
Yeah.
What are you going to take from them?
Yeah, that's right.
So I know this is sort of like an accelerationist argument. I know people would suffer, obviously, if we lost the 501c3 status, etc. But I think it would be a great benefit to the church in her holiness to undergo that.
Yeah.
Even while we enjoy the various benefits and protections that it currently provides.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's kind of like that. Do I want to say this? It's kind of like that thing that the worst tyrannies always are the greatest creators of saints.
Sure.
You know, it's like it forces us to actually choose God. Blessed Franz Jaeger said, I actually just put this in an email to somebody yesterday. He actually points out at a certain in his writings that it is more impressive when a martyr recognizes a confrontation with the principles of the gospel early on for things other than an explicit rejection of Jesus Christ. That is so much, because that means that person is in tune with God, that he is with him in heart, mind, spirit, and that he recognizes when his truths are being stomped upon earlier on than most others. To kind of be that red martyr where you are told to stomp on the crucifix is something, most martyrs never even got there. Mm-hmm. But also that's for somebody that needs to have it perfectly laid out for them. Mm-hmm. Blessed Franz says, where they need to be told explicitly, like, this is it. Whereas really, we need to be doing the hard work before recognizing where the gospel is already suffering, where we're already stepping on the crucifix, without realizing it. Does that make sense?
No, totally. No,
yeah,
that's very profound and true. And I think unfortunately because we worship Mammon, a lot of the calls to martyrdom are pushed off to this sort of ostensible future.
Right.
And what we don't see is that we are complicit now. Our little acts of usury, our little acts of hoarding, our little acts of, doing the normal thing because it's the done thing, because people will look at me weird if I don't do the thing.
Right,
because
right.
I need to have investments because I've been told to have investments. The kind of unthinking that occurs within a
ultimate fear of getting away from those, of trying out a new God.
But in answer to the original question, though, which was essentially like, could doing that be a reason to avoid taxes? I think it's very difficult because no one tells us what our taxes are for in particular, and it seems to be a whole mess. But I think you could apply a principle that we seem to always apply, which is that you're free. You don't have to give taxes.
I don't have a YouTube account.
But you're probably going to cause a lot of harm if you don't. To people you love. And so there's prudential decisions to be made. But the idea that the Christian is somehow, like in this instance of taxing just because it's taxing, somehow now no longer has a conscience and just has to pay the tax is obviously ridiculous. That's not at all what Jesus meant when he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar.
Exactly.
That was him inviting us to make that prudential decision. That was not him saying, like, taxes are always... Right, because, okay, fine, Caesar asks for 100% of your income, and it's a tax. So what, you have to give it because it's a tax? Like, no, obviously not. Like, that's called tyranny. So taxes can be tyrannical. Tyranny must be resisted prudentially. Yeah. So the question is simply, is it just? And if it's not just, is it prudential to resist it, or does this create more harm than good?
Right.
That always applies.
Yeah, I think a couple of, I know this would be kind of an act of protest, as this person is saying, but your funds could be going to the arborists of America for all you know. And it's like, what do you have against trees? So that's the predicament here. I would also just say, spend some time on the side of the, thinking about the Pharisees within that story of Christ. Whereas they really didn't want to pay taxes so as to have more money, making sure that's not, I think that's a constant motivation for for a lot of us, including myself. So I think that's just one where I need to keep myself in check too.
People love more money.
This is like it's an excuse to do something more radical, even maybe than what is called for by the gospel.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Not the real radicality of the gospel, I should say. Okay. Anyways, what's next?
What are some practical ways to invest in real community, or not not like real community, like the cultural community, but small businesses, etc.
Give them money.
Yeah.
I got a friend.
Okay.
Who's your friend too?
Yeah.
His name's Luke.
Yeah. Hi,
And
Luke.
He invested in a grocery store. that we're
Yep.
putting in on 4th Street.
Mhm.
Right now it's like a pickup. People order online, you pick it up. But we want it to be a regular old grocery store.
Yep.
So with very little, formal, with not a lot of formalness.
Formality.
Formality. There it is. We said, okay, this money would achieve this good for the business. We'll pray for you if you do it, and we'll love you forever. And if you give it, we're going to pay you back, but no interest. So he's not, but in doing this, we're going to invite you in to start volunteering, laboring. The other day we found a beautiful tile floor. Did I show you this yet?
No.
So under that red carpet
Yeah.
in the storefront, we peeled up a bit, and it was so sad because I was like, I want hardwood. And it's like, oh no, that's not hardwood. But then I realized it was a layer of glue so thick as to obscure the beauties beneath. I took a scraper, I scraped, and there is this gorgeous little hex tile stuff, in a sort of floral pattern throughout. Anyways, guys, I'm getting sweaty in here. It was beautiful. Anyway, so he's there, he's laboring, he's working, right? So then the goal is to sort of to pay him his money back, but then also recognize that labor at the end of a period. Cool. But no penalties sort of discussed, and no sense of involvement in the institution itself, but it was very simple.
Yeah, I'd say just to asking about ways in which to invest in community. What is this investment for? If it is kind of your goal to make more money, there's one answer to that. If the goal is instead to actually start to build up the kingdom of God and dignify labor explicitly, and that's like the prime goal, then there's another answer. I would, just to kind of answer the latter. I think it's really important that whatever we are building up are really answering true needs that the community has. It is good. It'd be awesome if more companies were employee owned, or that there was profit sharing, or if somebody who's really skilled had their own company to creatively run as they want. That's fine. But if it's just another thing in the service sector, and you're doing it for the sake of wider distribution of property, fine, but it's kind of LARPing at that point in my mind, because you're not doing it out of a real need that's going to benefit the larger society. You're doing it for a need of that singular person, who then is going to use marketing to tell the larger community that they need what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And what happens when we invest in the production of luxury items, which is essentially what you're saying, right?
Luxury items, yeah. Not all services fit that bill, obviously.
Right.
So I just...
Luxury items,
excuse me for
services,
speaking sloppily.
In the sense of not being a true need, right?
Yeah.
What we do is we solve one person's problem by increasing another person's problem.
Right.
Because now that person's success in business relies on other people's labor being translated to money and spent on that good that they don't need.
Right.
So then they have sort of a net loss. Okay. So necessary institutions, like a butcher, would be awesome. By the way, if you're a butcher and you're like, I don't know what to do with my life, please move to Steuben.
Oh, I will invest in your company.
He will literally do it.
Yeah. We just kind of mapped this out yesterday.
Farmers around here, like they're trying to butcher animals, and they're like 2 years out. They're making dates to butcher animals that don't exist yet. Like it's a need.
So weird.
It's a big need. Also, midwife.
Yeah. Well, she just needs to kind of get here.
Come on over.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, but these are considerations that you need to make. Really knowing your town, and I just don't think that there's any larger system for doing that. It would be great one day if we could create something like a larger VC firm, a true Catholic VC firm that's set up for your town, in every town, so that people who have excess funds can put it there in starting new businesses in the same way as you would at some point put money in an almonry. So I think if
call it the dignifying labor machine,
something like that. The machine really undoes that. Yeah, but we need to get there, and we need to have very skilled, very intelligent people starting to form these companies, because these are the things that are actually going to start to change the social order at a faster pace of what we're doing it now, and in a way that's, I think, in keeping with Catholic social principles. So it's fleeing the enticements of mammon, it's fleeing the enticements of ambition, and it's really trying to put a dedicated effort together to actually build a town that reflects God. But I think the first thing is, in a lot of us, is trying to figure out, well, what's the real point in doing this? And if you're trying to find extra cash, then I would try and just rework the job that you have right now, or cut back, on what you're on luxury items that you really don't need, rather than trying to manipulate it or create a new system. We just so desperately need people that take investing seriously, that is the major call right now. So
microfinance, I don't know what that is.
It's really small.
So like small loans.
Yeah,
I was wondering if you had thoughts on microfinance and how it is being utilized by certain Catholics as a way of poverty alleviation. Look, micro and macro, you can't be a usurer, so I don't know. Like,
well, I mean, there is the whole Lateran 5 thing.
Talk to me.
Well, the permissibility given in Lateran 5 to the Montes Pietatis, the hills of holiness, one could translate it, or great piles of grace, another way you can translate it, where there were loans given out to the poor, and at some sort of interest rate, but they could not. The companies, the dung piles of grace, could not have profits at the end of the day, and they really did have to be given out for charity. So it's just to sustain the enterprise, and that's it.
And again, I'm sorry, I know I harp on this.
Yeah.
To my mind, maybe I'm wrong on this.
Sure.
But when you say interest is permitted in this case,
and
you go on to describe the interest as simply funding the operations of the loan-giving institution, to my mind,
or people,
we should not use the word interest.
I think we should use the word interest and not usury.
I see.
Yeah, but
So
in this case, but realize what this means,
Yeah.
though, is that does not apply to any banks today.
Well, sure.
Okay, so that's just it.
I think
it doesn't
my
work.
problem,
Yeah.
Jacob, is
Yeah.
and I know we've gone over this in private, so hate to make it public. But I got a problem with you.
There's nobody in this room.
That's
other
true.
than, yeah.
Well, it's just like
I'm here.
yeah, hey, what's up, bud? You're a disembodied ghost. I don't listen to disembodied ghosts. Why am I repeating myself? Does the formulaic description of usury throughout scriptures and in antiquity
Mm-hmm.
is to charge interest on a loan? You think about the Proverbs, like a good man doesn't charge interest on a loan.
Sure.
Maybe this is a translation error, but to my mind, it's somewhat scandalous, I think,
Mm-hmm.
to the church today to have that as usury,
Yeah.
and then to come across some kind of description of charging extra, asking for more back than you paid for, than the initial loan is given, and then saying, okay, here's some allowed interest. Because what this has the effect of doing is people saying like, well, it's complicated. Apparently, when the Bible says good man doesn't charge interest on a loan, they meant that sometimes he does, and that's fine.
Well, yeah,
so it seems to me like a simple semantic answer to this is to simply define interest interest on a loan as unjust. And then say, when we have other things,
when
we
there's
describe
external
them.
cause.
So we say like, no, I'm not charging you interest, which is money made on the giving of the loan itself.
Yeah.
But this is a charge for labor. So this is a charge. Or I'm not charging interest. I am penalizing you with a fee for being so late because it has created all of these problems that now need to be paid for. So there's penalty, there's charge, there's,
Sure,
price,
actually that's
whatever.
And I actually think that latter category is the exception that's being made.
No, I agree. Like whenever it's described, because people say, well, actually interest is allowed on a loan. Check out this condition. And then I look at it and I'm like, yeah, but that's, and I understand I'm making a semantic argument. Like sure, if we just wanted to say, okay, well, let's do something else.
Yeah.
Let's say that there is a category called interest, which just means more than you paid for.
Yeah.
And then we can say there's good interest and there's bad interest.
Right.
But to my mind, this is my opinion. I just find it semantically scandalous because then people think that interest is that those traditional condemnations have been somehow corrected in modernity.
Yeah, or even that there's not something inherently wrong with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. I agree.
Cool. It's on camera.
No, I think that's right. And we can kind of keep going on a number of these occasions. I just think like one of them somebody else proposed is that that what you're really doing is paying that these organizations could be buying something on your behalf. Like I bought this table and you're paying me more back for it. There's some problems with that, especially when you're talking about percentages, rather than like a fixed rate of payment, which is clearly the better operation there. But anyways, that's just to further your point that there's actually something else going on.
Yeah, or like when people say, well, I surely I can charge interest because of inflation. So like if I give this loan out and then everything becomes more expensive, then I'm going to need more back.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, why don't you just call that accounting for inflation?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean there's other problems with that. I would say like, well, at that point inflation never happened to you. It happened to the other guy.
Right.
But how did you get out of the communal effects of debasement? That just makes you out to be like the king.
Right.
That's a jerk. That's a jerk. Yeah, the wicked king, the tyrant, the jerk. That's a jerk move, man.
All right, we should start moving a little faster.
All right. I'm missing all these calls.
You getting calls?
Yeah.
Oh, is that why your leg's shaking?
No.
Did you check them?
No.
Jacob, I've had a revelation about Jacob. Because I think about what I do. I write and I edit, and then I do other things besides. And I was like, well, Jacob writes and edits, but I don't think that's the thing. And I realized the other day, Jacob has meetings. I was complaining. I was like, I'm on my 4th meeting today. I'm going to go lay down and die. And Jacob's like, I'm on number 9. And it's 12 o'clock. It's amazing.
One day I will just be a sleepy professor.
You're a different animal,
it'll be
Jacob.
great. Yeah.
You're a different animal. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Can a Catholic work in the modern finance industry?
No. Next.
With the usual caveats. Say you're in the modern finance industry. You just became Catholic. You gotta take a little time. Sure. Say you're in there just to break stuff. Okay, I doubt it. But say you are. That sounds fine. Say that it's necessary for you because without it, your family will starve. Okay, get a new job.
Cyril of Alexandria once, or Jerusalem. Ooh, this is bad. No, I think Alexandria.
Split the difference. What's between Alexandria and Jerusalem? Aleppo!
Is that? Yeah. He just mentions at one point in a letter how there was somebody converting out of an actor's background. Like he was an actor. And you can't act.
In fairness, having met theater kids, they all do need to convert out of whatever that was.
And so the church just supported him until he actually started to have skills, like develop new skills to be a productive member of the church, and we probably should just be doing that again.
Yeah, it's sort of an obligation. So I had this argument, and then I realized I was wrong about the frozen embryos. Like, can we implant frozen embryos to let these kids have a chance at being something besides frozen? And then, of course, realized that I wasn't thinking about the objective nature of the act, which, of course, always involves divorcing the unity and procreative nature of the marital act for the woman who is considered, in her kindness, unfreezing the embryo. Anyways, all of which is to say that that's not true of financiers. They're little frozen embryos, but without sin, you can take them out of the ice thing and provide them with a womb in which to grow.
That is beautiful. Yeah, honestly, like, look, I
like, you come over to Steubenville, you're gonna be poor, but it's gonna be okay.
We'll take care of you, man. Yeah, but these are just a couple of things to add on here. One, don't fall into the temptation of watering down Catholic social teaching so as to justify your position.
Yeah.
At worst, say that you're backed into a corner, and that you're just going to remain there, but do not make the church's declarations less than what they actually are.
Yeah.
And then come here and we'll help you out.
Yeah, I mean, just think about modern finance industry. I hate two of those words, and the middle one is obscure. So just, don't do it. It's another interesting thing that people... I'm adding a question here, because a lot of people in finance, especially like asset management, that sort of thing, have said to me something to the effect of like, well, I'm really skilled in this regard. I can give my services in this regard. I'm very able and very capable. And I think this is a little bit of a shuffle, because it's like, one of the problems that we have is that all of our intelligent people are going into finance. And that's one way to describe it. The other way is to say that all of our intelligent people are being mutilated into finance, because instead of there being the creative imagination for like what the ability to organize could do in the world, there's the sort of mainstream thought that equates more money with more success, and then with the good motivation of using your talent, you get right down that lazy river. Well, it's not lazy, actually. It's insanely aggressive. But
level 4 rapids, baby.
Yeah. But I just mentioned that argument to say that I don't think it holds a lot of water. People do this a lot with their skills and talents, where we're told from a young age that we have talents, they're given to us, and then we have to use them for God. But then this shift happens, rhetorical shift happens, that catches a lot of us, where the talent is given a corresponding institution within pagan modernity. And then that for God thing is considered not in the sense of the use of the talent that you have, but in the sense of how do you sanctify extrinsically this bad institution. So I'm talented in this way, which means I have to go into finance, and now I apply Christianity to the financial world by doing X, Y, or Z. And we've had a friend, I won't mention him because I don't know where he's at in all this, but who did as much. He was really good in finance. Then he became morally convicted in certain ways and started to try and do the kind of like Christianization of finance thing, where he was telling people about stocks and in terms of what companies they support.
Yeah.
How did he end this whole journey? He got out entirely.
Yeah.
He eventually said, forget it. Stop investing in the stock market, period. It's not about just whether a company happens to be ethical or not. Like, it's about the act itself.
Yeah.
And so he sort of went through a spiritual trajectory that I think is everyone's destiny if they just keep their conscience open.
Yeah, Mark at Christ Center Capital. No, he's an amazing
All right.
guy.
We're
Yeah.
naming him.
No. I think I would like to point people to him. I think he's awesome. So,
Yeah, he's a cool guy.
but I think that's really important, and I think it's just I want to go back to this investing thing. Is that we are in such desperate need of people who are really going to take charge and change the social order with the power that they have.
Yeah.
So stop using the mechanisms and the systems that we have. Stop creating these crazy little packages together that are maybe for some semblance of a good cause, like stabilizing a family or something like that, and focus on what's actually happening at a wider cultural scale. That is your duty. Don't try and justify what you're doing continually so you can just put some balm on a wound. That thing is festering underneath this lame balm that you're putting on it. There's real work to be done. If you really have talents, then change the mode and operations of how investments are enacted today.
Totally.
Do something new. We need you too much to continue you doing what you're doing right now.
Yeah, like if you're so good that you have to become a banker, then why don't you just start a bank and make it a bank that actually lends money without interest? Like if
there's a lot of
imagine it
or something like that. I
know there's a lot of bank problems.
But I think the venture thing, there's a path forward, and if anybody's trying to get out, look, come here. We'll support you and your family, and we will help you design this thing too.
A VC firm that gives to crucial institutions within towns that can be like repeated but not identically. Yeah. Okay, loans. Is putting money in an interest-generating bank account something Catholic social teaching would discourage or condemn?
Which one is lifted from that today, though? I mean, everybody is.
Yeah, I'd say discourage, but in a really broad social sense, which means we're trapped in it.
Yeah.
Like
I think this is one of those things that Scott, when he was on the podcast, he mentioned that whilst living in Babylon, don't force us to live in ways that we can't, or don't force us to live as if we were living in Israel if we're trapped in Babylon.
Okay.
There's a lot that we can do, and but there's sometimes I just try and live life without a bank account today. I just don't think it really is possible. Maybe it is
for
if you're
rich
like
people, if you're speculating on everything, right?
No, even like
because you need to translate it into cash at some point, so you need a bank account.
Yeah, or like try and figure out how they get paid by your company or anything. I just don't really think it's, unless you're like totally off grid and stuff. But then you're not listening to this podcast, so that's not you.
And that's condemned by the church.
Listen to this podcast.
Not listening to this podcast.
Yeah, that's right. So
speaking as the church.
Yeah. That's a liberty you're giving yourself now. So I just think.
But is the church considered as the tradition generally pleased as punch with the fact that in order to get by in the world, we all have to put our money in accounts that are then speculated in the market and to make us a return through institutions that are allowed by state power to pretend they have more money than they do,
or utilized to entrap my friend into 3 decades of debt.
Yeah, or my friend. We're getting personal on the banks. I mean, my friend who has basically for the last 3 years not ever received the full Social Security check that was due to him because he is forced to always overdraft his bank account because he is hit with the fees that multiplied so rapidly that his check comes, pays the bank, and then he gets what's left. And so then because it's so little, he's forced through rents to pay to overdraw. So overdrawing for him is just like a tradition. It's like a monthly tradition. Overdraws, gets charged. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And of course, there's the famous yacht that the inventor of the overdraft fee, or at least someone famous to this, made a yacht, the name of which is overdraft, because that's how he paid for it. So, anyways, hate all that.
We're gonna have to wrap this up soon, man.
Okay, sorry.
I'm getting heated here.
Okay. He's getting phone calls. He's getting heated. All right. While we seek to adopt alternative Catholic systems of lending, is it acceptable in the meantime to do this? Okay, we already answered that. There's this one question, the invention of capitalism, which is such a leading question. I mean, props to whomever, I don't care,
Whoever wrote this.
who wrote it.
Props
'Cause
to whom?
It's just some softballs. It's like, is entrepreneurship routinely described by elites and regarded by the masses with a kind of salvation narrative? Yes. Do members of entrepreneurship promoting organizations like the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor possess essentially or superficially the same attitude or vices as the elite/factory owners of the first industrial revolution, who were glad to see the idle peasants begin to finally demonstrate industry by coming to work in the factories? Yes. How are they like? Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, yeah. I mean, I think that there is the whole rise and grind culture. Is just too much. Like, look, you can have a massive expenditure of energy and time to solve a particular problem, but as a way of life and as a judgment of how we ought to live, it is simply not true. We are. I mean, and people get this way, and it's just. Honestly, at some point, I just think it's a way of people avoiding their families, like this whole religion of productivity and entrepreneurship. It's like maybe in the Industrial Revolution, yeah, it was from the side of the capitalist owners sort of promoting a new ethics to justify factory life, sure. But now, when a bunch of guys into real estate and their phones are like working from 6 to 8 p.m., it's like maybe you just don't love your wife. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe your kids are annoying.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, if entrepreneurship, which is praised by John Paul II, is actually just masquerading for ambition,
yeah, right,
then there's a problem.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm being kind of like, I'm making sexual distinctions here, but I just think guys are super prone to try and attain marriage and its goods as something that's like kind of expected of them and kind of an achievement. I got a wife and now we have kids, and like, aren't I the best? But then the kinds of things that matrimony teaches us, like by its nature, which is like sit down with a baby and stay home and eat dinner together, and the things that are just written into marriage itself, are somehow not part of the marriage, where this becomes like, okay, I've done the marriage thing, and now in this general sort of masculine ambitious drive, I can subordinate all those realities as not being the end of all of these other things I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lot of this entrepreneurship stuff. It's just men not having the courage to really be at home. But that's just how I feel. This one I liked. Would you consider it immoral to own a cabin? Well, there's more. In a vacation area to rent as a vacation rental.
I don't know, man.
I don't think so.
I
ran this by Alex. Can I just say what Alex said?
Yeah.
Alex is my guy for just like particular moral conundrums, because he's a really clear conscience on matters of like very practical import.
Yeah, and he is right to be, man.
And he says, yeah, it's fine because like, what is a vacation rental? It's not something that anyone wants to own. Like, now the question of the price of it is obviously always applies. Like if you're trying to get rich off vacation rentals, then you're using Catholic morality as a way to ease a conscience that you shouldn't be trying to get rich off vacation rentals. Mm-hmm. Sure. But if you can see it as a service and also a benefit to your family to say, well, we come to this cabin, 2 weeks out of the year, but then this way we're able to keep ownership of it, and we get to serve other families who want to use it at different times. Therefore, our rental price is this because this is the cost of maintenance, etc. Yeah. Taxes on it, or whatever, you're paying for it in some way. Then sure, like, what are you gonna do? Tell a person who wants to go on vacation, like, oh, sorry, bud, you really gotta tend to this rent here towards ownership. They're like, what I mean? Like, precisely the point of the vacation rental is that you don't want to own it.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to own it, you would want to own it as a vacation rental, which would be just to repeat the situation.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, do I think that's what's going on with people who are using vacation rental properties? I don't know.
See, yeah, so
seems like it would be better just to have a sweet cabin and give it to your friends to use.
Yeah, and if you have to rent it out, 10 days a year for an Airbnb to be able to keep that going and like rent it out for priest retreats or whatever else.
Yeah, or like find
That's cool.
or sort of do the math, find the number of people and get to know the people that want to use it regularly, and then say, hey, we should all take care of it.
That'd be cool.
You know, like if a pipe breaks, like, you know, go into co-ownership as opposed to like if there's a desire from other people to do that.
Yeah, I like that.
I think that would be ideal. Okay.
That's cool.
Josiah, I haven't heard from you in a while.
That's true. There's.
You wanna
one
build
good
a
one in here.
cabin on my
Have y'all
property?
had
I
interaction
want to build a
with
cabin on my
Tony
property.
Annette and his Catholic-nomic
But on your property.
project?
Oh, sorry. We were talking about. You know what I want to do? I want to build a cabin out of railroad ties. I think I could do it. I was looking up some.
No,
videos.
you can't because they have what's the poison thing that they put in it?
Well, it's not poisonous. It's
Well, what is it?
It's just tar or something.
But
But
there's something in the tar, but you can't
it's-
put that
I'm
inside.
not talking about like a cabin to live in. I'm talking
Oh.
like a little
Just to look at.
like potting shed. More, I should say,
Oh,
potting
cool.
shed with a wood stove,
Okay,
so I can keep plants in the heat outside
I like that.
in a sweet little cabin.
That's super cool.
Josiah, you still there?
No. Nathan Bird asked if you guys had any.
The bird.
Tweet, tweet.
Everybody's heard about the bird.
If you guys had any interaction with Tony Annette and his Cathonomics project.
Nope. Next question.
All right, there's that.
Sorry, Nathan. I wanted to be able to answer that. I actually have very little contact with anyone on principle. Next. Got another one, Josiah? Here's one.
There are
Can
two
you,
women in the chat just for you, Mark, just so you feel better.
ladies, is one my wife?
No.
Yeah, she's not feeling good. Prayers for my wife.
Here's
there's
a great
lot
one,
of disease
actually.
around here.
As a college missionary, how can I encourage college students with little to no money to be virtuous? What could this practically look like? How could they invest? How should they save, etc.?
So thank you for asking this question, because I think that it misses the point in a good way, because it's a teaching moment, which is if you're dealing with people that don't have money, then do not emphasize the virtues concerning money in the way
Having
you
it.
would with others. It's
Yeah.
like they have so much potential precisely in being poor. They don't have money, which means that they are able to, and they often don't have a lot of risk because they don't have families yet. They are able to volunteer. They're able to starve themselves. Yeah, I'm serious. Like in college, like you can get people to do things that they simply will not be able to do later in life because of the number of obligations and responsibilities that come with having money, property, family, etc. So preach to them, virtues concerning like radical presence to other people. Like don't tell them to invest their $10 in a way that's going to benefit the community, because it's really not. Tell them to go out and give their time to homeless people. Tell them, to do things that one of the things that really pained me about getting married is that for me, I'm serious. Like one of the things that was as difficult about it is like I just couldn't really relate to drug addicts in the same way
Anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I just couldn't.
That's
It's
true.
like there's a certain degree of like, I'm sorry, you can't, like they can't spend the night anymore, for instance. Like if they needed that, it's just impossible, or they can't. And I'm not saying that in particular is the call, but like there are things that are available to people in college who are poor and without great risk. They're kind of living as proto-eunuchs for the kingdom in a certain sense because they are detached
Totally.
from property
Yeah.
and family. And so I think it's a wonderful time. And I think sometimes like that gets mixed up with the sort of spirit of youth. And you, as a person who's in that situation, you think, well, now's the time to be a bit irresponsible. So I'm just going to do lots of like drinking and partying and doing irresponsible things because I don't have any. And the unfortunate result of that is that often Catholics respond by swinging the other direction and saying, no, here's all your duties, and they end up somehow sucking out the joy from youth. Like they say like, well, no, you have to be responsible now, and you have to start saving now, and you got to think about the future, and like start like some manic quest for a wife or something. You know what I mean? But well, that can be fun too. Come on, we all like
give
a,
them that.
a
Yeah.
good manic quest for a wife, but
Can confirm.
but there's a kind of
It can't confirm, I think.
But yeah, no, Josiah is a
Or-
good example here, right? Like he can do things that are in the world's eyes irresponsible to a certain extent because of
Yeah.
his own poverty and, maybe I shouldn't use Josiah as an example.
I mean, I did the moving to Steubenville story is kind of a
Right,
thing in
and
the
like
eyes of the world
whenever
that
I'm
is
like, maybe
really
we should
dumb to
kidnap
do.
a senator, he's like, I'm down to kidnap a senator, Mark, and I couldn't do that the way he can do that. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. I just don't think preaching money virtues to people who don't have money is like teaching them about it in a certain way that's like gets them so they're not surprised, because obviously there are things you can do with very little money, right? Like you can still give gifts. It's just sometimes the gifts aren't things you buy. So you can start working on
Yeah, you find them on the sidewalk.
the virtues,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't think it's super helpful to like describe them all in terms of money, because sometimes that can have the effect of delaying virtue until this future state.
Mm-hmm.
What are the virtues that a poor person can practice right now? What are the virtues that a detached person can practice right now?
Yeah.
Like, man, if we had college people who were irresponsible, like virtuously irresponsible to, I mean, I know that's impossible in a certain way, but
Yeah.
for a rhetorical flourish, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
if the college career, if all that capacity for, were spent in doing the things that families can't do, like that would be pretty rad.
Yeah, I think those are the things that need to prepare somebody for their vocations ultimately as well.
Mm-hmm.
And talk about actually preparing people to become better priests too.
Oh, sure.
So I think I toss those things out. And then the other thing is that if you do have an ear of a college student, I would really get them to start questioning, like considering, well, like what are the real jobs that we need now to build up the kingdom of God, instead of just saying like, well, I'm going to be, totally radical now, but when I, get older and I get a more ambitious job, then everything's going to get, no, like keep that, profound love and surrender for Jesus Christ into your formal career if you ever have one. So
yeah, your work should become that. Yeah, it is a sad but definitely real thing, the kind of like fervent like focus net ministry to digital graphic designer pipeline. I don't know what else to call that, but it is a real thing and it's not the fault of the ministries or anything like that. The problem is that we have this idea that it's this idea of like the virtuous life not being a coherent whole that's always relevant. Okay. This one I should ask this because people always ask it, and I feel like you've answered it, but maybe you could do it quickly. Can we have self-directed IRAs?
Look, there's the big scary monster that's speculation that is always going to be looking you right in the face when you're talking about these accounts. Don't give in to it. If you have them and you're trying to find a way out, there's some, I think it's newpoly.com/research. We have some suggestions there that I would rather point you to of how to creatively use these things in a way that doesn't cave to speculation.
Yeah.
But they
Are
are
you talking about
not
the
as
page
stable.
with the underlying portfolios for Christian investment stuff.
No, not that one.
Okay, that's new research.
Is there a second one?
Baby steps for divesting.
There you go.
Baby steps for divesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say, but they're not stable. These are not long-term answers. I would also just really, I mean, if you're in this spot, I don't know your life circumstances or what is being demanded of you. But, pray for real courage. Pray, maybe even that prayer of St. Augustine, the whole, like, give me continence, but not yet, not continence.
Chastity.
Chastity.
You
Yeah.
might have said continence.
Yeah. But not yet. And, but really, like, don't look too much at what you currently have. Look at where you're trying to go. That in the Great Divorce, there's that terrible image of the man like holding the chain and just not letting go of the idol that he's just attached to, but it's just him holding in his hand, and you're just hoping like dude, just let go of it. There's so much more for you. There's so much more joy. And that's kind of where I think of a lot of people in this position is just like, just let go. There's so much more joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could, I think something that I hear your frustration a lot is when people are looking for ways to basically moralize an evil act.
Right.
You know, they're saying like, okay, I get it. Like, you know, this kind of investment is bad, but can't I just do this? And now I've got, with the Roth IRA, I've got more control, and I can, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with the Roth IRA is it's still through the stock mechanism, right? So you're still
predominantly. And
so but the concern then is not to simply what Jacob is often trying to do, and I think it's quite right and really very beautiful, is to say, look, we can have a discussion on like the sort of morality of the act. You know, we can break it down. This is the point at which speculation is still occurring, even between a Roth IRA versus a 401k. And so, but the larger problem is simply that Christians are supposed to be free. There's freedom in Christ. That's what we're for. And when we sit here and look for how can I continue to participate without a stain on my conscience, right? We're in a very infantile form of morality. Yeah. Like, we need to grow up. We need to say, how can my money be always for the poor? And is a speculating mechanism, however specific we can make that speculation, is that ever going to suffice? And I think the answer is obviously no. Like, the answer is that we need to, sometimes these things that seem like questions, that seem like we're puzzling about how to be good in the world, are ways of avoiding the very adventurous leap that we're being called to make.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we spend so much time trying to figure out like the perfect, mechanism for Christian morality, that we forget that it really doesn't have a lot to do with mechanism.
No way, yeah. And if you're struggling with like, well, you know, it's too easy to pull out, like it's harder to like slog through that, and it's like, that's not what you're made for.
The yoke is easy, man.
Yeah.
Burden's light.
Yeah.
The yoke is the poverty you take on, and is the expanded sense of creative control and freedom. Like, now you have to decide what to do with your money in a way that isn't mediated, but is going to be very direct, involve you very directly. So it is a yoke, it is a burden, but the idea that, and Catholics do this a lot, where they're like, well, this way seems hard, difficult, tortuous, agonizing, it must be correct. It's like, no. It's not quite how that works. Okay. I don't know what a census contract is. There was a question about it. Do you know what a census contract is?
You know, I have to, yeah.
All right.
Wave
Sorry
my
for
white
skipping.
flag
I'm
of
sorry for skipping on
ignorance.
that. I'm just
Sorry.
I'm not sure what that is.
Sorry.
Can't investment managers build up the kingdom? I'll read this one because it's at least a very common sort of thing we get. A friend of mine works as a big bad investment manager, where he focuses on building connections with small businesses and redirecting funds from 401ks into profitable, honest, wealth-building enterprises instead of faceless stockbroking.
Cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. He believes that what he does is a good thing because there are many goods that can only be accomplished via large-scale money managing. I don't know what he means by this next thing. He operates more as a Thomistic corpus than a modern corporate tentacle, you could say. Which you could say, but you might not be understood. Consider Aristotle's different... That's not... I'm all for a parallel polis, says this lady. But does not the value of industrious and fiscally conscious leadership also build up the kingdom of God? Or is the kingdom of God truly not of this world? Well, sometimes it is. If it is not of this world, then why is farming more expedient to the soul than financial management and investing? Like, we're petering off, but I think the first part kind of...
So I think the first thing is that guy sounds like he's starting to do the things that we would hope.
Yeah, if what you mean when you say you're an investment manager is you sit down with people who are in 401ks and say, divest from your 401k, and then here's some great stuff to do with the money.
No, yeah, that would be great. I think what this guy's doing is taking money from 401ks, like he's creating
it's just a new
form of investment, and so people are.
So it's still a 401k, just different.
Yeah,
companies,
so
maybe?
there's a couple different ways that he could be Yeah, it could be that. A, B, he could be um, in a bank that sells the stock to the person, and thus they own the stock, and he takes their money, and then that goes into small companies. But I don't think that's probably the way either. I would like to get in touch with this guy. I would love to know what he's doing. So. But I just want to be kind of positive on this one, and say that, sort of creative solutions for taking normal investments now and diverting them from Wall Street to Main Street is obviously a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Now, farming is absolutely better for our souls than finance is. The church has always been clear on that. And
You know what the Jews said?
What did they say?
You're
never supposed to put those two words together in a sentence, right?
Well, the rabbis, is that better? You know what the rabbis said?
Yeah.
They said that all the woes of Israel begin when they leave behind farming. You know what else they say?
What else?
There is no man poorer than the one who has to pay money for his food.
Oh, nice. I like that. Wow. Hot takes from the rabbis.
Yeah. Just something to own the anti-Semites out there.
Yeah, I think that, I think that one's pretty clear in the tradition on many fronts, and we talked about that a lot throughout this podcast, so I won't bore anybody with that. But I think it is our call to return to the primary ways of human cooperation instead of these kind of secondary tangential ways that are relatively superfluous. But this is certainly a time when holy Catholic investors who are trying to change the system as it currently is are needed, and we all can be doing more than we currently are. So.
Yeah. All right. The commons. I love that you guys have talked about reviving the commons. Can you respond to the tragedy of commons argument that is all the rage with the economists? It's not anymore, though, is it? The tragedy of the commons argument has sort of been pretty much debunked by, history.
Sure. So the argument is that the commons weren't really forcibly enclosed, but rather people were wooed away from them to the beautiful smoking buildings in the city.
No, that's not tragedy of the commons. Tragedy of the commons is where it's a economic principle. It's being described as an economic principle. It's actually a lie. But the idea is that within a limited resource, everyone is going to try to get as much for themselves as possible, and then the common is going to be destroyed.
Right.
Because since you're always worried about the one greedy guy, then you must anticipate one guy's overuse of the commons by making sure that you get something. I mean, it's basically just an assumption of the state of war.
Oh, yeah. So that's interesting. So
that's how I understand the tragedy of the commons.
Okay, cool. I like that. Thank you for teaching me
there
this.
were commons, sort of, but because of human nature, they all dissolved, which is just funny because what actually happened, of course, is that the commons were deliberately privatized and sold away from peasants who were moved to work in factories.
Yeah.
So if that's what you mean by the tragedy of the commons, yes, I also weep at that tragedy.
That's historically what happened. I think, you do find some occasions of this in, of like that tension that they're talking about, though, in Andrew's book, where like the guy brought out his pigs on the commons.
Oh, yeah. It's not like a placid pond here.
Yeah. And, in that case, it's just like, hey, man, you ruined the peace. You're taking the court.
They
fighting, tell you to stop.
There's assertion of rights. There is drunken squabbling.
Yeah.
I mean, this is all part of the lay vocation here. I mean, to manage a commons is sort of what we do. It's just that we deny the existence of them so often these days. I mean, they might also mean by the tragedy of the commons the idea that because commons benefits, it might be a population argument. I don't know for sure if this goes under this title. But I think your point is simply that a commons is maintained through a community that is all involved with it as a common good.
Yeah.
And so are unable to enact their own laws concerning it.
That's
And
my
law-
argument.
And law is not positivistic, right? It's not like the peasants write the laws on the tree, though sometimes they did.
Mm-hmm.
The law is primarily customary, and that is precisely what's recognized as law, as having authority over positive law in the Middle Ages. Namely, I won't go too much into this. The point is simply that it is something that always is defended. It's something that is always like, if you take, like, we have this idea that when we talk about the commons, we're talking about this like hippie communistic paradise where everyone can kind of come in and do what they want and take what they want. It is literally the opposite. It is the most intensely managed, right-bearing phenomenon within history that I can imagine. Like, you pick up 3 sticks instead of 2, your ass is getting beaten up. I'm serious.
Scott Hahn would say, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, like this, like, you read these things. I've never met any people more aware of their rights than people like moving pigs around like an old tree.
Yeah.
They're like, do not mess with the peasant and his rights. And it's not because they had this whole positivistic sort of constitution that they all signed to be a part of the commons or something like that. It's like they had an awareness that what has been done, by the very evidence that they're currently living in peace, must be good to keep doing.
Yeah.
Like, this is the conservative sort of beauty that marks out peasant economies and communities wherever they are in South America or medieval Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
So this idea that it's not the case that there's some argument that people aren't sinful, it's that there is an argument being made on the basis of history that people are actually conservative.
Well, and not actually the nasty, violent, and brutish people that Hobbes says that we are.
Because when someone is nasty, violent, and brutish, which definitely happen all the time, there is a shaming of that individual and usually a penalty.
Yep.
And whether that penalty, like, Illich talks about this a lot in his book Gender. Like, sometimes the penalty is just you get, made fun of. Sometimes the penalty is that, like, they put creepy dolls on your door and it, like, shames you. I don't know. There's a lot of weird things going on. But sometimes it's all the way up to court. Like, the king's men tell you that you're taking too many sticks, so you take them to court and you win. But common spaces are managed by communities that are all participating in them as good for all.
Right.
And so this is where these kind of lost realities of management by the distribution of honor and shame on the basis of certain acts. It's like, how, I don't know, we just get so silly about this sometimes. Like, because we even have these things written in our law that, like, well, it's illegal to break the peace. For instance, like a police officer, if we're doing a festival, we have a common space that we're all mutually participating in as good. Someone's drunk and takes their pants off. Okay. What is happening there? Is it that we are somehow involved in a common situation that is just doomed to fail because people are bad? No, we all kick him and make him leave.
Yeah.
And we even in law, like, have this general description of, like, well, he was breaking the peace. Or, I mean, okay, pants off is bad. Rowdy, drunken behavior could even, could fall into here. And the point is, we are fully capable of legislating over common spaces as rational beings, as fathers, as sons. And we actually do. Like, when, I mean, I do this all the time. Like, we're at a party in a building and a drunk guy walks in. It's like, whoa, what do? I legislate. I take him out. You know what I mean? I don't say, like, sir.
Yeah, you do that all the time.
I do it all the time. I don't say, sir, recall your signature upon the social contract. I police, I regulate, because that's what we do. Where do you think police officers come from? From people that can police. Where do you think lawyers come from? The devil. No, I meant people who can legislate.
Yeah.
No, that's not lawyer. I don't know what lawyers are for. All right, so, sorry, getting all worked up, but, we're not as impotent as people think. And the idea that the commons is doomed to tragedy is just another way of saying people are impotent, stupid, and incapable of managing a common space. Can you be a Catholic and live in California?
Oh, man, I don't know. I haven't been there for a long time.
No, I read this. It's sort of long. He's talking about living in a semi-rural town, about feeling like the beauty of place, of placidness. And then apparently several times I have said things to the effect of, it's a sin to live in California. So I am sorry that was sinful for me to say without providing a clear, like, I'm just joking sign. California kind of weirds me out, but I've never been there.
You've
And
never been to California.
I haven't. But my presumption is that I'm only receiving from it these certain, like no one goes out and preaches about the small farm in, say, California. You know what I mean? Like people who are virtuous don't make the news.
That's true.
This is why, I mean, sometimes they do, but it's always a little bit sketch when they do,
Yeah.
if you've noticed.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, it's like, and now here's a guy enjoying a cookie,
Yeah.
It's just- you don't get that.
So
guy
my
too often.
presumption is, like everywhere in the world, what is actually the case is not like a giant ideological regime where people are sort of, understandable via television.
Mhm.
But what is actually happening is that the revolution is not televised, and people are having families and obeying the church and blossoming. And if that's what's happening, I say do it in California. May God bless you.
Yeah.
We have two pretty good questions in the live chat if you guys are interested.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, with a
The
sales pitch
first
like
one
that.
The first one is basically if you guys were in charge of a diocese's financials tomorrow.
Is this an offer?
And what would you do to remove it from investing, and what does a 5 to 10 year plan look like for that?
I accept Bishop Monforton. Thank you. I've been waiting for this call.
This is awesome. This is a great way to do it, too.
Yeah, I know. It's momentous, All right. Well, gosh, I really want to give a good answer to this, but I think I need to think about it.
But I don't know. I feel like
This is okay.
first thing you do is you get the boys together,
Yeah,
because no decisions should be made without counsel.
it's true.
Okay, so now the boys are in the room.
All right.
Okay, now we're talking.
Us and our cool friends.
And you say my sons. No, you bring all the priests together.
Yeah.
And you tell them that we need to collectively repent, change our ways, and come to Christ
Mhm.
in a financial sense. You've been heroically serving at the altars. Now we have to bring that same heroism and the courage that only comes by the Blessed Sacrament to begin to change our lives and to welcome men into new places. And we start to make certain promises to the diocese as well. That we're not going to save and amass, and that we're not going to use new financial techniques to give longevity and life to projects that don't naturally have it, that are not bubbling out of the overwhelming desire to convert the world and to bring new apostolates to our diocese. But rather we are going to, or that are not doing that, and we're going to start doing that.
Yeah.
If we're against technocratic, overpowering here, but giving people time to priests to preach this to their communities, to get on board with the vision that Christ sets out for us would probably take at least a year.
Yeah, and I think the
And
first.
then- oh, sorry, go for it.
Well, I was just thinking the goals that we would set, I would imagine,
For the 5 to 10 year.
would be something like
Plan.
this. We need to liquidate all of our priests' retirement funds.
That's right.
This might worry the priests. Therefore, before we tell them we're going to do that, we go to the laity
Mhm.
and we get all the wealthy people in a room. And we say, swear an oath right now to each other
Mhm.
that you will not let our priests face a poverty that you have the means to fix. And once they're sworn,
Mhm.
once they have, because they should, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Then
No, that's
Then you go to the priests and you say, look, we are getting out of the market. The market is not going to be the way in which your health and well-being in your old age is assured. It's going to be your people. The sheep shall minister to the shepherd at the end of all things. You're all things. Okay. So then we've got commitment on the one hand, and we've broken the news on the other hand. And now we can move in freedom to figure out how we're going to do it because we have assurance.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that's important. Like the thing to know is that you're going to be taken care of. We're not going to let you slip through the cracks. You've served us,
Yeah.
we'll serve you.
Yeah.
And then it's, I mean, that's where I don't think we could particularly have the time to sort of say what precisely we would do. Like, are we just passing a hat around? Because we could do that. Are we building up an enterprise that specifically funds the retirement of the priests? We could do that. I mean, there's different ideas.
I mean, there is obviously there's significant considerations. So, I mean, taking, you tell me. So you've had your, I mean, they're not there now, but you've had your elderly, ailing in-laws living with you for a while. How much of an expense was that? Extra expense for you?
Like in terms of money?
Actual money, yeah.
So minimal, I wouldn't even count it.
Right. I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people fear is that if your main recourse for retirement is welcoming another person to your home, then it's not that big of an expense. And if it becomes one, that's when you don't need to save up. You just need to ask the community for help, and it just can be something spontaneous.
Yeah.
So I really think that that's like a worry that we need to kind of be rest assured of, that it's not really a true concern.
So but that would be,
and so I don't think there needs to be like some crazy financial plan.
Sure, I see what you're saying.
Is what I'm
it's
trying
not
to
that
say.
hard, and I
Mhm.
agree. It's not. The difficulties are always difficulties of charity, and I think people mask those as difficulties of money. They literally say, like, how can you possibly afford that? But they don't actually think, like, what am I paying for?
Yeah.
Like a little more food? Like what's happening here?
Yeah.
Okay, but step 1, retirement plans out of the market.
Yep.
Step 2, one of the things that bugs me is it's obvious that everyone needs a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker. But because the church is buying all of its candles from centralized national corporations who I will not name, then
China.
Well, sometimes it's China. That's true, but there's also some American people. But the point is that there is a economy that surrounds the church that has been obliterated by the church's participation in global capitalism. What I mean is your particular parish has particular material needs that could be provided for within the community. This could include the priests, it could include the religious, but it could also just include the laity.
Yeah.
The reason that your child doesn't have a friend living across the street from him right now is because there is no candlestick maker to occupy that house because the job has been sold off.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that crazy? Same with all the other ones. Communion bread, that's been centralized and capitalized. I think the last, small religious order that's producing communion bread in America has been shut down.
Has
shut down.
There is one other, I think in Wisconsin.
Right.
Yeah.
But the point is any aspect of the material functioning of a parish that used to belong to the people and provide for them jobs and participation in the material support, which is what the laity do, offer the works of our hands.
Yes.
Right. This has been outsourced to a supply chain. In a way, there's a lot of hope because it turns out you can outsource it to a supply chain and still have the Holy Mass. That's great. But on the other hand, there is a way of looking at the parish and saying, okay, so if we're a family, let's start acting like it. And part of acting like it is making sure that everywhere we can within the running of the parish, the question is never simply how do we provide this at the cheapest rate possible? The question is how do we provide this in a way that it enables a Catholic to be here with us, to worship here with us.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be something I would do.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Just start
too.
cutting off those purchases and redirecting them into local production wherever we could.
Yeah, and if you're kind of scared about that, I mean, why didn't we do this? We almost bought a communion bread maker thing.
It's still possible. It's just that it is designed for such
an enormous scale
that it's like running the machine in the space it would take we would essentially almost have to supply it from the diocese. Like what we need is a smaller machine.
Okay. Yeah.
That was the only problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because these are things that you don't even need like people to have jobs for. I mean, if you just have a
that's true.
rotation of 10 families and they're all spending an hour a
Yeah.
week doing it or something like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
even 2 hours a week.
Um,
And how beautiful. We should find a smaller machine.
Yeah. And then there's just a lot of they're being totally like open about the diocesan finances. Like because the question is, okay, we're in charge tomorrow.
Sure. Yeah.
Like actually acknowledging, despite all clericalism, that we are in fact the church together. And that this isn't some kind of like hippie ideal that's creeped into the church, but like have, don't just ask for money because there's an annual campaign. Like tell everyone where we're at all the time, constantly. Just make it available. Like, yeah, it's just a weird thing that we get because we compare the church to a corporation and then we start acting like the kind of success a corporation has should be the kind of success that we have. And so then what we do is when there's some sign of failure, quote unquote, as in like people aren't giving enough, because we're not a freaking corporation here. But when it feels like that, it's like, oh, we're kind of down this year. The reaction within the system of a large 501c3 is to hide it from people, to like put on a face, to say, oh, we're moving forward and we're living in the spirit and just everything's going to be great. And then all of a sudden, you're this diocese or that diocese, and you're like, yeah, we're closing 60% of the churches. And everyone's like, what? I thought we were doing so good. Well, it's not just because people are like, I don't think people are being particularly vicious. I think they're following the logic of the institution that they're in, which is to sort of, what do you do when you're in a big corporation and you're trying to impress a board of investors? Well, you spin it.
Yeah.
You spin it well, and then
Yeah.
people, and people, we teach our leaders business techniques. So you've heard it said unto you that no one likes to support a sinking ship, or something like that. No one wants to invest in a sinking ship. And so okay, sure, there's a certain logic to that outside of the church. Like you want to always present something as a success in order to, get more people to it. You're a fundraising man. You understand this, I'm sure. But in the church, what are we doing? We're taking care of the poor. We're providing for the worship of God.
Yeah.
If we don't have enough money, we need to just ask for money and to praise God for that opportunity to be visibly poor.
Yeah.
So that everyone involved realizes themselves as that church that is poor. It's like you, business leader, you thought you were rich vis-a-vis an object which you call church that is poor. In fact, you are poor.
Yeah.
You are poor. Through a poor distribution of money, you are poor. So move the funds.
Yeah.
Those things are only available through transparency. I'm not talking about transparency as this like value of 501c3s. I'm talking about the value of family, the value of saying we're in this together. What we do, we only do through everyone's contribution. And so,
Yeah. I mean, just to really make it too simple is that you can really only care about things that you know about.
Totally.
And so you just got to know about these things, and so that's prized. And if there's, and you got to, I mean, this is the other thing is that once you are no longer sustained by mechanism and instead sustained by people, then that kind of puts you in this situation where you got to do a lot, you know, and the church, not just the pastor, but all the church leaders are really going to be working harder to get stuff done.
I don't think priests understand the laity sometimes. Like, no, and I mean this, and I don't mean this. No, I mean this in sincerity. I'm not trying to do a bit. I mean, like, I think something happens in this great divorce, this church and state myth, this whole thing that somehow puts the laity as this like secular temporal reality vis-a-vis a spiritual. Okay, we've heard this critique of liberalism, but something happens where the priest almost presumes that the laity feel towards money and politics the way that he feels towards money and politics, which is for the priest, you have been celibate in the Roman Church. You've been deliberately removed from property, not for the sake of like, so you can live an easy life or anything like that, but for the sake of being truly available. And your love, if you have it, is not for, the sort of temporal ordering. Your love is for the salvation of souls of your parish.
Yeah.
Okay. But the laity are involved in the same work of sanctification of the world. You're doing a part of it, priest. But the laity are doing a part of it. And guess what? We love politics. We love a problem. If you came to us and said, all right, guys, I need $100,000. Not a fundraising campaign, not a whole but the presentation of a need as a problem in which you're participating, the boys would rally.
I know.
The boys would do it.
I know.
There's no way we wouldn't do it. When is the last time a bishop in a diocese actually approached its diocese, not in this they had a company design their fundraising campaign and so you get mailings and stuff, but went for it, presented the good, presented the people who have the money as the only way of getting the good, and then told them to figure it out. And then I'm very familiar, we used to be better at this. I mean, I've talked about this, I think, before, in our own parish, reading the history of fundraising efforts there, where
yeah, sometimes that was too far, but
I think so.
Yeah. But Father Greer did this the other day at Friendship Room. So this is literally a house that we have. It's not adjacent, but immediately across the street from our church, that just welcomes anybody in need. And it's not a system. It's not there's no bureaucracy. There's no state help. It's just literally, it's Molly and Victoria.
Yeah. Immediate needs.
Meeting immediate needs. Yeah.
Incredible.
And so it was the easiest ask I'd ever seen, because it was end of November, and they did put together a dinner and brought a whole bunch of people into town, and everybody came because you just know what they're doing is just obviously good.
Yeah.
And Father Greer gets up there for the ask, and he gives that line from Cardinal George that, the poor need you to be able to eat, and you need the poor so as to actually not go to hell. I think he says it so you can actually be a Christian. I think that is what he said. And, it's just the easiest ask in the world, because it's what we're supposed to be doing anyway.
Yeah.
So I think if we started putting it on as duties, as we really saw it as this is our home, is that we have to upkeep, and those under our care is wider than we thought it was. Otherwise, it's just, we're just not going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I also think we have to get rid of pews.
Yeah, that'd help.
Yeah. All right. Next question.
Did you say there's another one, Josiah?
There's a pretty good one in here, yeah. Somebody was asking, they say Mark and Jacob, but I would guarantee Mark hasn't read this book, so I'll ask Jacob if you have read Baron Metal, A History of Capitalism as a Conflict Between Labor and Usury.
I think it's behind you, actually.
You asking me if I've read this book? I've read parts of that book.
It's a big book.
It's a big book, It's I don't know. I have not finished it. In part, I got well into it and then realized that it wasn't actually as academic as I was hoping it was. And I think I'm very sympathetic, and we're definitely kind of moving in a similar direction, but the both the anti-Semitism and the hyper-Aristotelianism rubbed me the wrong way. So that's where I'm at with that. Sorry, I don't have a better... So just sorry to actually talk about the hyper-Aristotelianism thing. One thing that you don't have a full discussion on in Aristotle is the will. It's just not there. And that's the reason why you don't have a discussion of the person. So within a consideration of a community formation, there's often an absence of any idea of a social construct, particularly in a positive way, in something that you can actually analyze metaphysically, that emerge out of the collective wills of a community, of people in a community. And so you do find certain critiques of usury coming out of the Aristotelian tradition that I'm not as convinced about, because it first fails to recognize money as that social instrument, and then fails further to analyze it as a collective decision to utilize it in a particular way. So I mean, there's yeah. So I just think that there's a more dynamic way of evaluating usury than along these lines. But no, again, this is the second time where I'm talking too long about something that I haven't fully read. So
Read yourself. Come to your own
Do
conclusions.
you want to wax on the German tax structure with the churches getting paid directly from the government?
not really.
Somebody asked about that.
Oh, no. I mean, it's sort of hard to talk about such things without people presuming that you're either advocating or not advocating for it in America, because we're Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas obviously in Germany, we're talking about a history that is not our own. So
Yeah, I mean, I think to try and make some sort of a bridge, I'd say that there is a reality of the necessity of tithing that is still kind of a dead relic in the German church, where it was absolutely necessary to tithe, and if you weren't going to tithe, that was a mortal sin, and the pains of hell were awaiting you. So there is, if that was the case and there was some sort of demand, there could be some sort of potentially justifiable remedial legal system to help people along the way. But that is just so far from being in the American consciousness that it just doesn't make any sense. And it kind of operates, I think maybe the equal parallel or a sort of American parallel to that would be the formation of endowments, where something where something artificial is keeping something alive that should be living only by the true breath of the Christian and not by some social mechanism. So that's what I got.
all right, I'm gonna run through a few of these super speed. Can you think of anything genuinely good that has been brought about by capitalism / free markets that you don't think would have arisen under whatever alternative economic system you would prefer?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, well, let's see. I was about to say a bandsaw. That was going to be my legit, but I think we probably would have gotten to a bandsaw.
Look, this is one of those problems
Yeah.
that the presumption is that only capitalism could have done industrialism, and so there's certain things that come, and not even industrialism, but things that are only really attainable through machine power. So there's this
Right.
presumption, because it is historically true, that through the capitalist model, we were enabled to get into the kind of debt we were, to build the kind of machines that we built in order to mass produce, in order to pay back massive amounts of debt and then ultimately profit. That this sort of, the logic of this ending up as profitable to people enabled the use of machines to basically, expand and take off. And there's certain things like bandsaws, I guess, that are, but I think it's tough because, on the one hand, that is in fact what happened. So that, actual history has a kind of necessity to it.
Yeah,
It's
that's a great point. Yeah.
but is there anything intrinsic to it? Like, is the sense of like you could not have otherwise
Produce this.
No, I don't
capitalism.
think that's true. Now, I do think that where there would have been,
I mean, just on the real point. I mean, this is not at all a plug for communism, but the fact that they were creating fighter jets and stuff like that too, under a different economic system,
sure, if that's
demonstrates
all you mean.
that there's, not a one product only.
But I think what people realize
System.
implicitly in what we're saying is that desires would have been very different, and so there would not have been. It's hard because the things that we really like now, we like because they work within a world that we're really in.
Right.
So it's like why is it that it's really awesome to have a car? It's like, well, without a car, look at you, how embarrassing. And
wouldn't you prefer a world, a car to not having a car? And it's
Right.
like, well, I can't even imagine what life would be without a car, and I'm habituated to liking it at this point. I'd also, I think that's true. I would toss in though that there's, the whole thing about Henry VIII not only crushing churches but also crushing kilns is kind of an interesting consideration too. Is that we were starting to not fully industrialize, but produce certain things within a limit that was slower, more considerate about what we were trying to achieve as a society.
Yeah.
And we could have done that. It's just really, it's that old line of that, like, love makes institutions,
Yeah, like we wouldn't have loved indefinite growth, for instance.
Yeah.
Like, windmills were made in the Middle Ages,
Yeah.
but no one thought, oh, I can get rich making windmills, right? It's rather that it kind of spread from town to town as people said, hey, that's cool, let's build that here. There was no technological drive whereby a mass-produced technological device that everyone needed provided for the family of its inventor and its producer.
Right.
That simply wasn't really a thought, it seems like.
Right.
And so it's hard to just read back into the past. However, I will just say this. You can own high capital things in common. Like things that cost a lot, you can own in common, right? So there's nothing about the complexity or the expense of something that I think necessitates the idea that one man owns it through the wage slavery of others, accruing to a profit that enables him to do such large-scale things as,
Yeah.
a factory
No, I mean,
machine.
religious orders prove this
Right.
completely.
Right. So wherever you can imagine wherever you can imagine something being, you can almost always do this, right? You can imagine, okay, there's a certain level of capital necessary for this certain industrial level good.
Mm-hmm.
Modern medicine, everyone brings up, but a tank, for instance, and it's not just going to be achieved by peasant farmers. Say, tank's a bad example, but that doesn't necessitate that the only way you get the good is by taking all those farmers who wouldn't otherwise create the good, bringing them into wage slavery for the production of a profit, and then when you get that profit, you're either paying back in the past the debt for inventing the machine or enabling that scale of production from a singular source of ownership, from the capitalist class.
Right.
Okay, the point is like that is in fact what happened. That's why we got the machines. No one's denying it. So that kind of argument that like, oh, you hate capitalism, but you're using a laptop is stupid. I mean, it's extremely stupid because it's just saying like that which happened was the only possible way it could have happened, which is precisely the argument no one has made. It's like, no, you could have a community of people who pool resources to have joint ownership of something that is both more complex but more expensive, principally, than any one of them could bear. History is replete with this, right? And in fact, it's precisely the reason why you can have things like workers' collectives or cooperatives or, employee ownership. Now you can kind of, if it was the case that only capitalism could produce the goods, one would presume that only capitalism could maintain the goods. But that's obviously not the case. Like there is such thing as inventing, machinery that literally happened through capitalism that is now being operated by corporatism, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And our main focus now is figuring out what things we want to keep and how to keep them.
Yeah, and how do we keep them if something... It's not a hard thing to say. All we want is good things that don't require slaves to get them. And if we are facing down the world and saying this good is so good, it's worth it to have some slaves to get that good, then we should be honest. That's what we are. We're slavers. I mean, wage slavers, right? But we're slavers.
Well, I mean, now we're just kind of a place where it's explicit because we're utilizing the slave camps in China.
So, well, right. It is explicit.
I think that's really important to say. It's like,
yeah,
we've gotten there, all right?
Yeah.
It's all on a qualitative scale,
Totally.
But it is the same scale.
No, it's just very, yeah. When I say wage slavery, I'm not trying to be edgy. I'm just saying like what it means for people. when they built the factories in England, they said the success of these things is in the subjugation of the laborer to the system through scarcity, through the fact that because he didn't have a commons, because he didn't have land, he had to do this, and his activity within the machine could be motivated through wages.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a secret. This is how it works.
They said it explicitly.
Totally explicitly. And so when I talk about, when I say wage slavery, I'm saying that it is an unnatural position to only be able to procure for the means of your existence through a wage. And typically throughout the world, we have described this situation as slavery. Slavery was not like a pure grinding of human flesh into the dust. It was paying for people to maintain their life and their health, and even to have families in enough of a manner that their will could be controlled by you. Like, you need healthy slaves. So it is no argument that wage slavery isn't really slavery because you're getting paid. Find me a point in history in which slaves weren't paid. If all you mean is that they were given benefits, like what do you think? They were just like you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Do you think they were just made into uncared for savages? Like, that wouldn't even make sense from the point of view of a successful slaver. Like, you house them, you feed them, and this was the argument of the Old South. Like, yeah, you guys are so mad about us having slavery. At least we treat these guys well, and like you treating your wage slaves.
Yeah.
And they had a point.
Yeah.
So, okay, why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because I can, and I think we have to formally argue that there is no genuine good in this world that by its nature relies on slavery for its existence. I think to say that is to curse God, right? Because it's saying, like, this good, which human beings need, is only attainable by the method of a enforced scarcity and a reduction of people away from ownership that's proper to them into a relationship of indefinite wage slavery. If you think that, then I don't think you think God is good. I think you think God is wicked. I think you're a Gnostic. Like, maybe you have some vision of some like further God, who's really good, we promise. But like, your actual relationship with the creator of this world is one of enmity because you think slaves are necessary.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is, I'm not just going out on a limb here. I mean, this is the difference between pagan and Christian civilization. I mean, Aristotle, I do think was a really good guy. Like, he seems like incredibly virtuous when you read him. But at the end of the day, when he looked at the world, he could not see past a necessity for slavery. I mean, there is a natural slavery to man, and that means that God made it that way, and God is good. So Christianity changed that. A lot of work, a lot of time, but it changed that. We can't even see that way anymore, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So the necessity of capitalism I just don't think it is compatible with even a remote sort of Christianity.
Cool.
Sorry, I'm supposed to be short. I'm getting all worked up on this stuff. It's just a nice question.
That was an awesome rant, though. I
Like,
really appreciate
really? You like
it.
that one?
Yeah.
That's good. I mean, Ivan Illich said as much, right? Like, the real question of our society, or like the real sort of moral crisis of our society is whether or not we can do without slaves.
Mm-hmm.
It's constantly it. That's the question of technology. That's the question of our bureaucracies. That's the question of states even. It's like, can we live without slaves or not?
Yeah.
Christ says we're all going to be free. The Antichrist says otherwise. And that's the situation. Okie dokie. Is it moral to pay taxes to an authority which will do evil with it? We already looked at. Would Mark and Jacob consider co-authoring a book on the topics covered in Good Money?
I'm writing it.
He's writing it.
Give me time. I'm sorry.
Not sure if I'm late to the party here, but I've wondered a little about the credit union and venture models that Jacob mentioned. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's not a lot of real credit unions, except for maybe one, whose name, of course, we're going to forget. Sorry.
I thought it was St. Catherine's in Oregon or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Basically, a credit union is just a name for a bank these days. They do pool the money from people, but then they invest it all, or most of it, I think, and the same thing that banks are allowed to do for magic reasons.
Yeah.
Also, credit unions can do. So there's not really a lot of difference there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Not totally substantive.
But, and then the venture models is more, I think, where Jacob is excited about.
Yeah, I just think there's an opportunity for people with money to start using it to invest in building up great things that need to happen and giving real critical care, to the new ventures, and advice and help, without an expected or goal ROI, beyond like self-sufficiency.
Yep.
But the real goal is dignifying labor and building up a new community.
Catholic investing isn't hard. It's just it's all about putting a cap on it.
Nice, I like that.
Is financial independence a valid pursuit if the goal is to fund a good but not immediately profitable endeavor, i.e. starting a farm while still supporting a family rather than classic retirement?
You know what? So here's an idea.
If so, what would you suggest to accelerate financial independence other than high-paying tech jobs?
Oh.
Isn't it funny how it works? You can have the distributist dream if you work for Apple. Then you can afford your little homestead.
It might involve moving. I mean, that's real. But I mean, I just think about the Dohertys, who's been on this show, and it's not he was a drama professor, coming from a farming background. He didn't once work for Apple. Yeah. I mean, not nor Amazon. He didn't. And
well, we're all working for Amazon in our own special way, but not deliberately.
So I think there's, this doesn't have to be an expensive endeavor, especially if you farm the way that they farm. You know?
And he's a very cautious guy. He wants you to come over for dinner, by the way.
Oh, cool.
He mentioned that last night. But he's a cautious guy. He's the furthest from prolific. So he had this very clear idea of like, I have a job. My job gives me income. You need a certain amount of income to start the farm. So you work hard. You work at the job, and then you reduce your hours as you can in order, as your farm increases. Okay, now we have a minimal grocery bill. Now, our house is heated with wood, for instance, or something like that.
Yep.
You add, and then you take away.
Yep.
Not everyone is that. Like, a lot of people are going to jump right in and face a lot of difficulties. The Dohertys always advise against this. But yeah, I don't think the idea of doing something that troubles your conscience in order to make a big packet of money in order to have a holy life later is good.
Yeah, and I would also just kind of toss out that there's saving doesn't need to be a giant pot. You need to save 20% for a down payment for land. But also you're talking about 10 acres, maybe something like that you want to get. If you get it around here, you're looking at about $3,000 an acre, so you need to save about $30,000. Then what about, starting a little house, just one that you can move into? It's not that much also, especially if you're going to be doing the work, like trying to put it together, right? And if you have Mike Sullivan, who
Jacob, stop describing your life.
Excavator.
And if you happen to live right off the Toronto exit.
Okay, so, I mean, this is what I'm trying to say is that, like, just
there's milestones.
There's milestones, and you can just start along the way and buy up, as you go.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. It's less glamorous, but I do think the idea of like the kinds of things that would enable you to do it with cash and all at once are usually not the kinds of things that are good for your soul or for the unity of your family.
And also the transition's like...
And the transition is harsh.
Really difficult. It's like you think about like having a new baby. It's like you don't give them when they're 10 years old. I mean, you're adopting, whatever. You know what I mean? Largely, they're coming right away.
Small. Yeah.
and God is merciful to us, and like gives us little babies so that we can like slowly learn how to take care of bigger and bigger people, and that kind of transition to a new way of life, which is exactly what parenting is actually.
Totally.
Is something that we should probably mirror in other aspects of our life as much as we can.
So buy the fetal farm. We're getting back to these frozen embryos.
Yeah.
Here's another case.
There you go.
All right. We are almost done, guys, unless Josiah is getting tons in, which I doubt because it's been a long time and people get bored.
What time is it?
It's 1:50.
Oh,
don't know if
I
you guys
gotta
wanna
go.
skip
You gotta
the
go.
rest of
Yeah.
those
All right.
questions, or
All
if
right,
you
sorry,
actually
guys.
wanna
Yeah.
go
We
through
didn't
them.
make it. Came close. Can we have a whole episode on cars? No. How are Great Ventures funded if we are obliged to give away our profits to the poor? Just watch the episodes. How does consumerism fit into our understanding of the proper use of money? It doesn't. Is owning treasury bills usurious? Nope. Right?
I don't think so.
I don't think it's usurious. What are your thoughts on the morality of rental housing? Yeah,
We've talked about that.
okay, so thank you guys so much. Josiah, is there a quick one, or is it all?
No, we should wrap.
Okay. Thank you all very, very much for not just this, but for the whole second season of
Yeah.
Good Money. I mean, it's only because you guys are ostensibly out there that we are in here. So it's wonderful. We're not going to be talking about money for a little while, but as Jacob mentioned, you can look forward to a book
Yep.
and towards various articles. If you have not already, please subscribe to New Polity Magazine, where a lot of this thought gets thunk.
Yeah. It's pretty good, actually.
It's
I gotta
decent.
yeah, I like it.
There's jokes, famous people, pretty pictures.
Yeah, they are very pretty pictures. Yeah, and so where are we going next? Maria asked us to make some announcement
About
about
podcast.
So
but what we're
next
doing.
week we are taking off because we're starting our new schedule.
Yes.
Oh.
So we're starting a new podcast schedule. From now on, you can expect 3 podcasts a month. Is that right?
It's every other week.
Every other week, right? Exactly. From now on, you can expect a podcast every other week. And we have some exciting new shows. Jacob is going to be leading Political Saints,
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. So,
But that's not our next series.
but that's not our
but
next
that's
series.
not our next series.
So I'm talking about it. Next
What is the next
We
series?
got some good
Next
soils.
is going to be, we're going to do them on Thursdays instead of Tuesdays for a
Oh.
bit.
Thursdays.
So it's going to be Throwback Thursdays
Nice.
Cool.
because we're going to be re-uploading some of the original episodes
That's right.
with Andrew and Jacob from back when it was post-liberal thought, because we've
Nice.
noticed a lot of our
Dizzy.
listeners are very engaged and having great thoughts, but they are asking questions that are answered in those original episodes. So we're going to be reposting those.
So these are like the critiques of nationalism, socialism, and liberalism.
I think so.
especially.
So the first
yeah.
one's going to be Creation is Political and
Mhm.
Political Christ, and that'll
Nice.
be in 2 weeks on.
Back when
the
Jacob had
20th.
hair.
Yeah, remember
A
that?
little bit of hair, not
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Josiah. So we'll be doing a throwback to some old episodes, and we will be doing Political Saints. We have some more good soil coming up, and then
There's a Christmas
eventually-
special
Yes, of
that
course.
we're gonna do. It's gonna be very funny.
What's that?
We're just gonna be drinking mead the whole time.
That's gonna be fun. And
Yeah.
then sometime in the new year, Maria and I will be doing a second season of the Politics of Gender. That'll be fun too.
Yeah,
Alrighty.
I think
Alright.
that's great.
Okay. Adios. Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
guys.
Bye bye.
Appreciate it.